Testing. Okay, apologize for the delay. Let's go ahead and get started. If everyone could take their seats. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Dee Dee Diadamo, and I am a board member to the State Water Resources Control Board. And to my left is my colleague and fellow board member, Stephen Moore. This is a joint workshop between the State Water Board and the CPUC, and joining us soon will be Commissioner Martha Guzman Aceves from the California Public Utilities Commission. The topic for this afternoon's workshop is consolidations of water systems. In California, we have nearly 3,000 community water systems regulated by the State Water Board, and even more small systems that are regulated at the county level. Some of these smaller systems struggle to provide safe, reliable, and affordable drinking water. One way we can improve water conditions for these communities is through consolidations, which means merging a smaller system with a larger system. Today we will hear from Water Board and Commission staff on existing authorities and processes for consolidations, along with the challenges involved. Consolidation can really be an extremely useful tool. It can result in savings, economies of scales. It's not the perfect fit in all situations, but where it is a good fit, it does seem to make quite a difference for struggling, disadvantaged communities in particular that are struggling with access to safe and affordable drinking water. But what we would like to do today is find out a little bit more about the opportunities that are out there under our existing authorities, and what challenges that are out there. How can we collectively, both agencies, work together to improve the systems that we have in approving these consolidations and encouraging voluntary consolidations. We'll be hearing from two water systems, Eastern Municipal Water District and California American Water, on their experience with consolidations, and then we will be taking public comment. The workshop is being held in accordance with the public notice dated July 31st, 2017. This is an informal workshop. Neither the board nor the commission will take any formal action, and there will be no sworn testimony or cross-examination of participants. The board and commission members and their staff may, however, ask clarifying questions of speakers. After receiving comments at this workshop, the board and commission may provide direction to staff regarding additional research, public engagement, and recommendations on the topic of consolidations. We'll begin the workshop with comments from any elected officials. Following the comments, we will hear the staff presentations from water systems, and then take public comment. Any elected official or their staff who is not part of a panel should please let Mary Yang. Mary, could you stand and identify? There we go. Let Mary Yang know that you're present. If you intend to speak today, please fill out a blue speaker card and give it to Mary. If you're not sure whether you wish to speak, go ahead and fill out a card and just mark it if necessary. In order to ensure that all participants have an opportunity to participate, oral presentations from any interested persons may be subject to time limits. Just depends on how many cards we end up receiving. We're broadcasting this workshop on the internet and recording both audio and video, so please be sure that you speak into the microphone during your presentation. At this time, I'd like to ask my fellow board member, Stephen Moore, if you have any comments.
Thank you, Board Member Diadamo, and thanks to everyone for being here today. And I look forward to hearing your comments on this really important issue in our state. And with that, I just welcome everyone and look forward to listening.
Thanks for joining. All right, now we'd like to provide an opportunity for any current or former elected officials to speak. Do we have any elected officials here today? All right. Now we're going to turn it over to Max Gomberg. Max is the manager for safe and affordable drinking water issues. And Max, just really want to thank you for your assistance in putting this together and coordinating with the commission staff and with Commissioner Guzman. So if you could go ahead and kick off the workshop and the panel presentations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Board Member Diadamo, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. We're excited to hear the presentations today, both from staff from both agencies, from the water systems, who are going to share their experiences, and then from the rest of you who want to make comments. And as was mentioned, neither agency is taking action today, but what we learn and what we gather from this workshop will inform decisions that both agencies take in the future. So this is a valuable opportunity. And so really want to hear engaging, thoughtful comments and creative ideas. We are open. There is no predetermined course of action that is already underway here at either agency. And as those of you who participate in the PUC world know, there is an open proceeding at the PUC that deals with some of the issues that will be discussed today. And so they're building that record, and you'll hear more from Commissioner Guzman Aceves when she arrives on that. But so that's the format for today. We may either from the dais or from over here interject with questions at the end of presentations, and hope to have some good dialogue at the end. So with that, I'm going to invite Darren Polhemus, who's our director of the State Water Board's Division of Drinking Water, up to give the presentation from the State Board staff on our involvement and authorities relating to consolidations.
Thank you, Max. So I'm going to run through a presentation here. It's going to give some background, and then we'll get into some lessons learned along the way. I have good staff to thank for this presentation, so I'm not going to take any credit for it, but I'll be the front man for it. So I really like this slide when Wendy put it in. Wendy, sorry. When Michelle put it in, because it gives some context to the discussion today about consolidations. And I was really blown away by the order of magnitude difference. And so when you look at systems with 7,500, roughly speaking, in nice round numbers, of public water systems compared to then 3,000 of those being community water systems, still a ton, and then compare that with community water systems, 77% of them serving less than 1,000. So I think right there you can pose a question about how we have got to this state and what we should do going forward. I will interject that there's some interesting, this question's been asked in other states. And so there's some interesting things we're trying to learn from other states across the country that face the same basic numbers and said that probably wasn't going to serve the state and the citizens of that state well into the future, and set some goals and some programs associated with that. So I kind of see us at the dawning, in essence, of where we are in that realization. This was also a nice slide because it also says, oh my God, what's going on here? So if we compare the number of public water systems within wastewater systems that we regulate in California, and then against electric utility companies, once again, orders of magnitude difference that really begs some questions about how did we get here, and do we want to be here, and should we change from this position going forward, and what path should that be? So importance of consolidation. I think everybody would agree that economy of scale plays a factor in kind of any endeavor you take, and that basic fundamental principle applies to water systems as it does any enterprise or human enterprise. endeavor that we undertake. And the smaller you are, the less resources you're going to have, the less staffing you're going to have, the less ability to respond, the more at risk those citizens that are relying on that become. And so those factors play a big role in the consciousness associated with the efficacy of those systems going forward and how well they serve their public. And I don't mean this to pick out on anyone in particular, but certainly those kind of rules of economy overrun us whether we're good intentioned or not, and certainly are not universal. There will be cases of which there will be small, well-run, well-financed systems. And so I don't mean it to be a blanket statement, but I think it serves well to understand that it's probably the majority of the instances that you see. And so when you then compare that to where the violations we see arrive at, the nice red text at the bottom to draw your eye to it a couple times as you're scanning through, I think it plays out in the results we've seen in California. Here's basically by the numbers, the results that you can see. And if you look at the percentage of violations, the very small ones obviously struggle the most. And so the facts bear out kind of my statements of earlier, resulting in the ones that are most likely to have trouble meeting water quality standards in California. So we could probably spend at least 3 or 4 weeks in a conference like this talking about how we got here and land use in California and all of that kind of stuff. I'm going to narrow it down to really, try to not get into that discussion directly, but to look at the realm of which we can focus on and ask ourselves, can we do better? I can't solve a lot of these problems. A lot of these problems, in fact, we were just discussing earlier, go back to Prop 13 and some other interesting choices of the voters that have set things in motion and that are, obviously impossible to undo in a lot of sense. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't just say that course of action shouldn't be contemplated, and then what should we do going forward in our thinking about how we want to approach that and come up with great solutions associated with that. Oops, sorry, too many. Nice map. Every one of those little names that you see there circling the bigger system or small little water systems. I'm an engineer, so the graphical picture means more to me than words. And it's just like, what the heck is going on there? And those are all little systems that now need someone to show up at. They have to submit a report. There's an overhead associated with that. And, on and on and on associated with it. And this is one snapshot. This isn't anything unique. I can find this at pretty much any urbanized area, and then satelliting around them, is this going on to some degree or another, I think is a pretty easy statement to make. So, solutions, right? I've got all the answers. Actually, Michelle had them. So, interestingly enough, if you look at some history on where we've been, consolidations, this isn't a new idea, right? We didn't invent this. This has voluntarily gone on to some extent because hopefully people saw the practical approach associated with it and the benefit to the people they served. And so, kind of long-term averages over the past 40 years, when Drinking Water came to us, they brought me a nice little list, and Michelle has it too, that show how many consolidations have happened, and it was averaging about 4 consolidations per year. All right, so switching now to present time, as of January 1, 2017, we've done 33, or 33 have happened, not us done them, but the communities themselves have done that on their own largely. And so this is largely there, and I noted Michelle told me to change that number to 32. So if you're writing it down, make it 32, not 33, being the correct person as she was. But give me a couple days and I'll have 33 back. Okay, so that I think is a huge benefit, just at least in the consciousness associated with people. And so I'm always pleased when I see that number and the path that it shows us for. But then I go back to my beginning slides of 3,000 systems, and 33 is, okay, progress, but we've got a lot of room to continue this approach and discuss where we're going with that. So quickly summarizing kind of what's helped prompt this, I hope, in some extent. Obviously, of those 32, I think all but 2 of them were voluntary. Right, one mandatory. So even though we're putting down Senate Bill 88 and 552 here, the mandatory consolidation and the administrative bills that were passed by the legislature giving the Water Board extended authority around consolidation. And I think the intent always was is that those were really just handwriting on the wall and that people took that to heart and moved ahead, and that we didn't have to wield those authorities, that really common sense would prevail in many instances and people would approach that and understand that. But we're not afraid to use it. We have a couple of places, that we're continuing on, and we will continue it when it makes complete obvious sense to follow through with the mandatory consolidation component. And I think one key part of that legislation that for some reason didn't get communicated well out to everybody was that the liability protection applies whether it's a mandatory consolidation or not. I'll let that sit for a minute because it really needs to be emphasized. The liability protection applies to voluntary consolidations just as it does to the mandatory. And it's amazing how many people don't quite get that yet, so I'll have to all keep repeating it as we go through. So very, very important to understand that when a system is talking with another one about voluntary and I'm not involved, the Division of Drinking Water is not involved at all, that those statutes still can cover the liability protection associated with that and be a key component. And then the other one was Senate Bill 1263 that gave us the authority associated with trying to prevent bad choices in the future that we know are there, and to basically not have new little small systems created. We can, in essence, veto that if there's a bigger system right there that can serve the water and require that to take place. There's still some wrinkles in that one, and some we're learning as well as we go through that with some little deficiencies there, and it kind of goes back to the land use planning slide earlier, but I think it's been enlightening, and hopefully we can continue to perfect that approach as well, because the only way we'll get that 7,500 number down is to not just consolidate, but to prevent that choice from happening in the future, and to really have people join. And you go back to that map I showed you with all of the little systems. I mean, seriously, they're right next door. What's going on there? There could be some legitimate questions about that. And we get to ask that question now. We get to ask that be demonstrated as to why that has to be a separate system. Couple examples. So the West Goshen Mutual Water Company was a voluntary one. You can see they had a list of issues associated with struggling, small disadvantaged community. We went with an intermediate solution to hook them up quickly, and long-term solutions as well. And I think this has been a good example of a successful project on all parts, and got a community past their problems associated with pre-consolidation. Another big one, City of Santa Rosa, arsenic violations in, again, small systems around, and you can see them listed there, and kind of highlight that one of the primary things dealing with these is always who's going to pay for the planning and who's going to set that stuff up. You can even have parties agree going into it that, hey, this is a great idea, but then implementing it can be difficult, and where's the incentives to get that there? And so those are good questions that we're learning as we go along. This was one of our mandatory ones, or the mandatory one. The other one was close, but not quite. But Pratt Mutual Water System. So again, a disadvantaged community had a new system installed and needed it connected, and so was able to bring this on and basically have success in this community as well. So just quick examples of consolidating small systems that have been beneficial. So there certainly are hurdles associated with a receiving system. None of us have been, not understanding that going in from the beginning. There's certainly a bunch of things we need to talk about going forward that can help this. And so these hurdles are interesting lessons. I think some of them we probably anticipated, and some of them more so or less so. One that surprised me is the very first one there is a lot of these systems, you hook them up to the system, they're actually pressurized at the proper pressure for the first time, and they show a lot of leaks. You know, it's kind of surprising if you think about it, but I guess not so much when, you know, the small systems were hard to fund maintenance and replacement, and, you know, we're not immune to this even at big systems. You know, the city of LA themselves has a huge program now after some pretty dramatic leaks that were in their very large system. And so I think this is a universal question that all water systems face, probably more than they care to admit. But certainly small ones face it in unique fashion because they probably have not been investing in replacing their infrastructure at all. And therefore, when you do think you're doing a good deed, you end up with a big water mess on your hands. Not that it shouldn't continue to process, but we need to go into it knowing that and then how to proceed in that fashion. There's always concerns when every water system concerns about their existing customer base and being fair to them about that. And those are also legitimate questions going forward that have to be there, and people have to understand that. And so how do you deal with that is very interesting. And at the bottom there, again, we mentioned the liability concerns and educating people about that associated with it. I do use a bit of guilt when I can. There's a lot of times when we get stuck in this consolidation and we're talking with a receiving system, you know, their mind drifts to all the problems they have or all of the services they provide. And especially if it's a city or something that does street paving and street lighting and those type of issues. And, you know, annexation has all of these interesting questions. And I do, at that moment, try to bring us all back to those are all great, and that community does need those, but we're talking about a human health issue here, and let's address that first and work on these bigger problems later. And I think, hopefully, in some regards, that can be a foremost question, or at least a guiding principle that as we tackle this. It's not going to be easy for anyone, and a lot of times, that small community, a lot of times when I'm at these ones, you don't even know you've shifted boundaries, right? I mean, technically, they are part of the community. They may technically be on the other side of someone's distribution map, but they don't know that. They shop at the same grocery stores. They are that community in and of itself. And so, you know, really being a public servant, we should look to how to extend into those roles as best we can. And all of us work hard to adjust to that. Some of the interesting questions switch. So obviously we have investor-owned utilities in drinking water in California. And there's some unique challenges associated with that, and I'm sure my counterparts will get into some of those as we talk about them, but we've highlighted a few of them here. Again, the liability issues always hangs there, and it has a different context for an investor-owned than it would for other ones based on some class action lawsuits, and also the political cost of cost sharing and stuff. All things I think we can work through and address going forward, but let's be cognizant that there's a distinction there. And I think as we've gotten into this, we've understood that even more. So this assume systems, a lot of people think, oh, we're doing them a favor and this is great, but it can also have consequences that can be difficult to deal with. A lot of them are going to start paying a much higher water rate. Some of us would even argue probably the appropriate rate that they haven't been paying. That's a tough sell. For some reason, it's good sport in our political discourse to always not want to have our fees raised 5 cents. But I'm starting the mantra of I had one water system very proud of the fact that they hadn't raised their rates in 15 years. I think that's criminal. There's nothing that stays the same for 15 years. I mean, a price of bubble gum, a candy bar. So if that's the case, then in essence, that system's, you know, in for the catastrophic failure. That's kind of like not changing your oil and all that kind of stuff, the type of stuff mentality. So there needs to be an expectation, and there needs to be some understanding that could be there. And we'll have to do a good job of really assessing and making people aware of the value of healthful drinking water for both the community and for them to proceed and associated with that. And so we're not underestimating that there's resistance on the other side sometimes for this as well. There's also this fear of control. Everybody, we get in these tribes and we get these communities and, we have the best intentions for them, and sometimes we don't want to relinquish control, or we don't want to join the neighboring tribe and become one big tribe. And so that issue pops up all the time. Years ago, I had an argument in a wastewater world context between two communities that didn't want to join together because they always played each other at homecoming football. And that was like, that's great. You can still do that, and you can still have all the pep rallies around it, but let's keep everybody's sewer bill at a reasonable rate doing that. And I don't think the community would know, but it's there. It's a human condition. So, and then this hints at some of my comments earlier regarding just the land use and general taxes. As we dig into this more and more, this is getting more and more in the way of things when you look at it. And how do we get at that will be some good questions and hopefully some good discourse today and in the future. And I think another very key bullet there is the community outreach, that consolidation requires a lot of public work, public understanding, education, bringing people along, making them understand the value that they're getting, what that can mean in their future. Us engineers like to show up and build a project and move on. That's not really what this is. This is building a community, so we need to engage those people with us that are good at that, service that role, and bring the community along and making sure that they understand the value they're getting, both communities in a consolidation circumstance, and win over the minds of the individuals so that they can go forward and really believe it's a good outcome. And Leslie's going to take over for me now that I've said too much. She's nicer.
We always like to refer to ourselves as the carrots and the stick, so I get to be the carrot and Darren's the stick, but I'm also a lot shorter presentation here. I just really have a couple of really quick slides to talk about the financial assistance tools that we have here at the State Water Board to help facilitate the consolidations. And then I'm just going to briefly touch on, some of Darren talked about hurdles, and we have similar hurdles in the financial assistance world in these projects. These projects are very complicated when you're bringing multiple organizations together to try to build one project. So in the Division of Financial Assistance, with consolidation, there's at least 2 projects going on. In some cases, there's more than 2. There may be multiple systems being consolidated. So the consolidation project is the one that is for the system that will be consolidated. So they may be improving their distribution system, upgrading facilities, things like that. And then we also have the incentive project for the project that will be the surviving entity. And the State Water Board approved in our intended use plan a subsidy for the surviving system that we can provide up to $10 million in 0% financing for that system, for them to do a project that they want to do, some improvement for their system. So we're using that as a nice incentive to try to encourage these larger systems to take on these smaller ones. And I think quite a few people probably aren't aware of that incentive. We had it last year. It was $5 million, and we didn't have any takers. So this year we've raised it to $10 million, and we're trying to advertise it a little bit more so that people know that it's a really great incentive to have a 0% loan up to a 30-year loan for a project that they want to do to improve their system. The other thing is that a lot of times there's capacity issues with the surviving system, and so people are concerned with that when they're bringing in another system to consolidate, and we can fund the additional capacity for the surviving system. And then finally, kind of the last thing that we're doing is we're prioritizing these projects. They are very complicated. We're putting extra staff work in. The Division of Drinking Water staff are wonderful to work with, so we've got a great team working on them. And we're really putting these as a high priority for the division. We have a lot of work going on and a lot of projects that we're working on, funding, but we are putting these up as a high priority for us. As I mentioned, there are some obstacles that we've encountered with the consolidation projects. Only the entity with the appropriate legal authority for the public water system can access our funding. We can't enter into an agreement with somebody who doesn't have that legal authority. And so a lot of times that's an initial hurdle that we have to have. There are costs associated with doing that work for the surviving entity. There may be need to go through LAFCO or expand their boundaries or their sphere of influence. Right now, we currently have technical assistance funding so that we can help with those types of things. We can actually help provide legal services to assist with the consolidation. Another hurdle is often with the mutual water companies. They often will issue a share to each parcel in the service area. And so then depending on, the bylaws of the company, that may require every single connection essentially to agree on the consolidation. So just getting the approval and the support for consolidating can be a big hurdle, versus just one entity, one owner agreeing to the consolidation if you have to get 100% agreement. So that can take, as Darren mentioned, a lot of outreach, a lot of work in the community to get the support for the consolidation. We also run into ownership issues. Sometimes, as I mentioned, the system may not be in good standing with the state. They may owe back taxes, things like that, and so the state isn't able to enter into a financing agreement with them. They may have documents that need to be filed with the Secretary of State. But anyhow, there are a lot of legal hurdles with these projects. And so there's a lot of staff work just working on trying to figure out all of the different pieces that need to be filed and need to be taken care of in order for these projects to move forward. And then finally, there is our grant funding is limited to small disadvantaged communities. And so for a non-disadvantaged community public water system, we do have loan funding available, but oftentimes it is a hurdle if we don't have grant funding. People are looking at that as far as consolidating, wanting a grant. But as I mentioned, I don't want to end on the negatives. The positive is that we do have technical assistance available right now through Prop 1. It is limited, but we are able to offer a wide variety of services. We can do environmental, we can do engineering, we can do legal services. So Prop 1 really expanded the repertoire of services that we had to offer to help with these consolidations, and it's been a huge help. It really has, because as we mentioned, there are a lot of issues. But I guess the bad news on that front is the technical assistance funding is limited. There's been a huge demand for it. We have a lot of assistance going on, but we are going to run out of that technical assistance funding in the near future. So we are, like we said, we're prioritizing consolidation projects, and we will be looking at that going forward as far as our limited technical assistance resources. So that concludes what I have.
Great. So thank you, Darren and Leslie. Before we move on to the next presentation, I just want to remind people that we do have blue speaker cards at the back of the room on the back table there. So if you do want to speak during public comment, please fill one out, bring it up here. And then just also welcome Commissioner Guzman Aceves from the Public Utilities Commission, and see whether you wanted to say any welcoming remarks.
Thank you, everybody. Well, I just didn't have much to say, but I was going to reflect on something that Darren just mentioned. And again, my name is Martha Guzman Aceves. I'm over at the Public Utilities Commission now. And one thing he said, which I just was reflecting on given the state of affairs in our country today, is that human factor that he mentioned. I think you said the human condition. Personally, just in my experience in working in a lot of these communities, that the ones I worked in were poor communities of color. And sometimes we don't talk about one of those human conditions that is very front and center today. So perhaps you've been asking yourself, what can you do today to be an affirmative supporter of democracy in our country? And this is what you can do, because sometimes we don't just get to the numbers. Some of these human conditions really blur us from getting to what is the real cost here. Sometimes we've heard a lot in these scenarios that the community is going to have to pay a lot more. Well, the reality is a lot of these communities are paying a lot more. They're paying $200 a month for their water. So I think they can afford to pay $70 a month for sustained water. Okay, so I just thought I would share that this is really important. We're talking about sustainable solutions. We were afforded a decent chunk of money that we haven't all spent. We have some money in our discretion, and we'd like to really partner public, private, be innovative, and come up with these solutions. So I really do look forward to hearing some constructive solutions and giving us the challenge to figure out the financing and get rid of those other human condition barriers. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So next I'm going to invite Rami Kalan, who's the director of the Public Utilities Commission's Water Division.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, board members, commissioners. Thanks. Good to have all of you here today. My name is Rami Kalan. I'm with the California Public Utilities Commission. I am the director of the Water Division. And today, my presentation is titled Water IOU, and that's Investor-Owned Utility Acquisitions. So I'm not going to use the consolidation word. I'm going to use the acquisition word, because that's really what's been happening in the space that I regulate. Okay. So I have 5 topics that I'll be covering with you this afternoon, talking about the total number of water IOUs, investor-owned utilities, acquisitions over the past 10 years, those past 10 years that I've been in my job, the size of the acquired utilities. I'm going to talk about the 1997 Consolidation Act. This is legislation that was put into the Public Utilities Code encouraging consolidation, as well as looking at a future outlook. So let's get to the numbers. So in total, investor-owned water utilities going from 2006, the end of 2006 to today, we're an order of magnitude way below what the State Water Board regulates. But we've driven the number of companies that we had from 135 just to 101. We haven't done 34 consolidations in 2017, but since 2007, 34 of our smaller, 34 water systems have actually been acquired. We also regulate sewer utilities. These are privately held sewer utilities. We currently have 12. We used to have 14. So now the question is, where did all these IOUs go? That's a fair question. So 17 of those went to other IOUs. So these are other investor-owned utilities buying typically smaller investor-owned utilities adjacent or not adjacent to their service territories. Our investor-owned utilities have also acquired a number of mutual water systems, 4, and as well as 1 new development project. 10 of our systems went to municipals and public agencies. Now, municipals have the ability to condemn systems, and on occasion they do that. And the Public Utilities Commission takes a neutral position in that, and becomes a superior court issue, and whoever prevails, the sale happens. And 7 of our systems, probably to the chagrin of the State Water Board, went to mutual companies. So these are probably well-run mutuals who had smaller systems located next to them. But in general, in my world, investor-owned utilities acquire other investor-owned utilities. So I wanted to talk about the size of the acquired utilities. So most of them tend to be really small. And in our world, we call them Class C and D companies, those with 2,000 connections or less, and less than 500 connections. So the bulk of those, 33, were small systems. One, however, was a large Class A system. This was the Valencia Water Company, which was actually condemned by its water wholesaler. It was a stock condemnation. I'm still trying to figure that one out, but it's no longer under our jurisdiction. So the key takeaway here is small systems are most ripe for acquisition. As we heard from the State Water Board, of all the violations and out of compliance, those are held by small water systems. You know, it's interesting, if you look at the location of these acquired systems, they're not just in the Central Valley or the coast, they're all over California. They far north, far south, in the middle, on the coast, it's all over. So the opportunities are ripe throughout California. It's not just limited to one geographic area. Let me talk about the Public Water System Investment and Consolidation Act of 1997. This was actually legislation passed that added 3 code sections to the Public Utilities Code. You know, it's interesting. I brought those code sections. I'm going to admit it. I tore this out of my PUC code book, but it's really small. It's just a half a page here. Really well-written legislation. And what it did is it recognized the needs of water utilities, infrastructure needs, capital needs, scale, and it said we should provide incentives for their acquisition. And here's the most important thing. The change, it said, was to use the fair market value as opposed to the book value. So the book value, in a nutshell, is the investment water utilities have made in their plant less their depreciation. Well, after a while, depreciation eats up all the value and they're worth nothing, 0. The book value drops to 0. But of course, a water system that's generating some revenues, has customers, viable, it's probably worth something more than 0. So this was a big deal. It said use the fair market value. And then it went on to say that fair market value can exceed the reproduction cost. Reproduction cost meaning if you're going to build a water system from scratch, what's it going to cost? And it said that if you can show reliability, health and safety regulations, you're going to help meet those, economies of scale, and lastly, the effect on customers, it should be fair and reasonable, right? You just can't burden the customers with unlimited costs. It just doesn't work. There's nobody to sell the water to anymore. So this was a major legislation that got passed 20 years ago. And the CPUC, in response, we issued a rulemaking, and this was called Guidelines for the Acquisition and Mergers of Water Companies, and that's probably why I'm using that word acquisitions and not consolidations. That was filed back in '97, and 2 years later, we issued a decision, and we essentially adopted a settlement from our Ratepayer advocate group, which you'll be hearing from next, and many of our water utilities, and that settlement was just as elegant as this legislation. It's only 6 pages in length, talks about timeliness, incentives, and notices. So Dr. Phil would say, how's that been working out for you? Since 1997, we regulated 200 water utilities. If you remember from the last slide I showed, we're down to 101. So in 20 years, yeah, we've lost about half. Okay. We have a couple of pending acquisitions this year that I can talk about. One is the Fruit Ridge Vista Water Company, which serves about 4,800 connections here in southern part of Sacramento along the I-5. California American Water has announced that they will be acquiring this system. California American is one of our larger IOUs based here in Sacramento and serving districts throughout the state. And secondly, the Mesa Crest Water Company. This is one of those small systems, a Class C. This serves in the La Cañada Flint Ridge area in Los Angeles, surrounded by other water systems. And Liberty Utilities has filed an application with the PUC to acquire this system. And that brings me to my summary. So the key takeaway was that the number of water IOUs that we regulate has decreased. Most people try to grow their business. I'm trying to decrease it. The majority of these acquisitions were by our other water IOUs. Might have to do with their goodwill or my ability to encourage them to take over other water systems. Acquisitions are happening throughout California. Size matters. And as we can see, acquisitions, as we heard from the State Board and my presentations today, they're going to continue in California. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rami. So our third presentation in this section of the agenda is from the Public Utilities Commission Office of Ratepayer Advocate, which represents ratepayers at the investor-owned utilities, and it will be given by Suzie Rose.
Whoops. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Great. So I am going to present on another aspect of consolidations, which we're going to call intra-utility consolidations, and I'll explain more about that in a second. So as Max said, I'm from the Office of Ratepayer Advocates. We're an independent consumer advocate within the PUC, and our statutory mission is to obtain the lowest possible rates for safe and reliable service. Oh, I forgot to switch that. There we go. So some definitions. As Rami was saying, at the PUC, we generally refer to acquisitions as the change in ownership of a system. And what I will be talking about that a little bit, but for today, I'm mostly going to be focusing on what we're, for the purposes of this presentation, going to call intra-utility consolidation, which is the merging of one or more systems or districts that are currently owned by the same utility. So goals of the presentation, hoping to provide some information on intra-utility consolidations, factors to consider, advantages and disadvantages, and then explore how key learnings from those apply to acquisitions. So consolidation. There's actually within the category of intra-utility consolidations, there's different types of consolidation. Operational consolidation, which is kind of the most basic version, which generally results in economies of scale. And right now, most of the Class A IOUs have already have operational consolidation across all of their systems. So what that means is they have generally one general office, an IT system that applies to all of their water systems, customer care that applies to all of their water systems, basically shared resources, throughout the state for all of their water systems. Rate consolidation is kind of the next level, and there are many stratifications of rate consolidation. It could be partial, it could be complete. When we're talking about complete rate consolidation, what we're talking about is that all costs and expenses would be shared by all ratepayers from the different regions or systems that are getting consolidated, and that there would be a consistent rate design and tier breakpoints, tier structure across all of those systems. So for those two, operational and rate consolidation, generally there are not interconnections. There's not an infrastructure connection between the two systems. In some cases, the consolidated systems could be, an hour or more drive apart, and so physical intertie would really be, financially infeasible. And I should also mention, so there is also the option, as we heard earlier today, of creating those physical interties, but in terms of the IOUs, that's generally not what we see requested. Occasionally that is a request, but it's usually more focused these days on the rate consolidation. And so I'm mostly going to talk about rate consolidation today because that's most of the requests that we're seeing from the IOUs, now have to do with rate consolidation. And I should also mention that there are some rate consolidation, there is some rate consolidation already in place among the IOUs. For example, here in Sacramento, CalAm's Sacramento district, there are 9 separate water systems that have been, have had a consolidated cost to operate for over a decade now. So then the second bullet point there is acquisitions, which is what we've talked about up until now, the ownership or managerial consolidation. And that could also include the types that I've listed above, the intra-utility consolidation. Generally, for IOUs, when an IOU, a Class A IOU, acquires a smaller system, the operational consolidation is fairly immediate. It might take, a little while to fully integrate it, but it's usually fairly quick. And then oftentimes, the rate consolidation is requested down the road. So it might start off as its own, independent rate operated system, and then at some point the IOU may or may not, but oftentimes we do see a request to consolidate with other systems that the IOU already owns. For these intra-utility consolidations, they generally come in as a part of the utility's general rate case, which happens every 3 years. The acquisitions that Rami was previously talking about generally come in as an advice letter or a separate application. So it's one very specific issue, and that's usually more under the purview of the Water Division at the PUC. In terms of the intra-utility consolidations, those come in usually as part of the GRC, the general rate case that happens every 3 years, and then ORA as well as the PUC review that. So we, back in 2011, had a rulemaking that established some principles to address when we're looking at those consolidation proposals from the IOUs. And the decision instructed us to look at the public interest benefits that are achieved by the consolidation in light of proximity, rate comparability, water supply, operation, and then really any other factors that could affect the public interest. And the ones listed on that slide are things that were called out by the decision, and you'll notice that it includes general affordability. So some other kind of general factors to consider for intra-utility consolidation. Just as a general matter of speaking, at any moment in time that a consolidation would take place, some ratepayers' rates would increase and some ratepayers' rates would decrease. But it's important to remember that which ratepayers are benefiting and which are paying can change over time. And I'll discuss that a little bit more in the next slide. So moving into some advantages and disadvantages of intra-utility consolidation. And again, this is mostly focused on the rate consolidation. So an advantage can be the risk pooling. Like I said, there's lower cost districts today that might become higher cost districts in the future. And so some examples of that risk would be regulatory changes. In the past, we've seen arsenic, Chrome-6, coming down the pipeline, 123 TCP, a natural disaster, upcoming effects of climate change. So those are just a few examples of things that could cause a small, low-cost system to experience a sudden and unexpected costly infrastructure needs. And so if systems are consolidated before that occurs, then the pooling of risk can help mitigate the effects of anything that might happen. Other advantages, we generally see economies of scale related to rate consolidation due to increased efficiency and productivity. And of course, as the Office of Ratepayer Advocates, we're always asking, how can we make sure that those savings are passed on to the ratepayers? And then there can also be affordability advantages to high-cost systems or smaller systems when they're combined with consolidated with lower-cost systems. Disadvantages. So it's possible that with these consolidations, we could wind up providing an inappropriate conservation signal. So for example, if the water supply availability differs significantly between the regions that are being consolidated, but the rate design across all of those systems is the same, we might wind up with a wrong conservation signal to one or more systems. Another potential disadvantage in larger systems, imprudent investments generally have a smaller impact on the rates as a whole, so they may not be as noticeable or concerning to the Commission. And then lastly, and I would say this is really the most challenging one from what we have seen, is that it can be challenging to gain support from ratepayers in lower cost areas when the proposed merger is with a higher cost area and the rates are going to go up. And we've heard this time and time again in public participation hearings when there's a proposed rate consolidation that the ratepayers in the higher cost district will come out and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's not fair. Why should my rates have to go up so that for somebody else's water needs? So, I don't think that, in my opinion, I don't think any of those are, too challenging to overcome, but just things to keep in mind when we're talking about consolidation. So now moving on to acquisitions, how can, what I've already talked about apply to acquisitions? So some factors to consider, particularly considering that many of these Class A IOU acquisitions down the road, there will often be a request for an intra-utility consolidation. Then it's important to keep in mind all of the advantages and disadvantages to consolidation that we just discussed. Additionally, as we've already heard, troubled systems can gain more access to technical and financial resources when they're acquired by a larger system. And then, as I already mentioned, the public support and public perception issues. So as the Office of Ratepayer Advocates, we're of course concerned with affordability. So some affordability issues associated with acquisitions. So this first one, I'm going to try not to get too far down into the weeds with it, but I think it's an important one. You heard Rami talking about how one of the incentives offered to IOUs for acquiring systems is that they're allowed to include the fair market value as a part of the rate base. So basically, generally, the cost of the acquisition, or the amount that's paid by the IOU for the new water system, becomes the system rate base. And for investor-owned utilities, there is an annual investor return that on that rate base that is built into the customer rates. The current range of the annual investor return that's built into rates is between 9% and 10%. So what that means is that when an IOU acquires a system, they're going to make a 9 to 10% annual return approximately on the amount that they paid for that system. So, as you can imagine, that can provide an incentive for a higher purchase price. So, usually when you have a buyer and a seller, there's some tension between the buyer and the seller, that the buyer wants to sell for as much as possible and the seller, or opposite, the seller wants to sell for as much as possible and the buyer wants to buy for as little as possible. And this does provide some incentive to the IOUs to pay, a higher price. So, again, not something that can't be overcome, but just something to keep in mind. Another affordability issue, so without protection, the existing ratepayers of the system, some of whom are low income, may wind up paying more. Right now, there is actually protections that exist if that acquisition is ordered by the State Water Resources Control Board, but my understanding is that those protections don't universally apply, and so it's just, again, something to keep in mind. And then lastly, as I've already talked about, that there would be opportunities for intra-utility consolidations post-acquisition that could help with affordability issues for high-cost districts and, could be challenging for the other districts that they're being consolidated with. So boiling it down, recommendations. So ultimately, we would recommend, from what we've seen, that all consolidation proposals be addressed on a case-by-case basis so that the advantages and disadvantages of that exact proposal can be assessed. Communication and coordination, which I think has already been fairly good between ORA, CPUC, and the State Water Resources Control Board. Sharing of information. We address the potential upcoming acquisitions at quarterly meetings. One point that's interesting is that the CPUC authorizes, the purchase for an acquisition, but the State Water Resources Control Board issues the operating permit. So the IOU, once they acquire the system, needs to acquire an operating permit. And so there are a lot of questions, and information that go into both of those determinations, and there could be some additional advantages to sharing more of that information throughout the process. The next bullet, transparency, and this is something that's really important to us at the Office of Ratepayer Advocates. First of all, having ratepayer input from all of the different ratepayers for the acquired systems and the consolidated systems. Really important to do the math and figure out what exactly will be the changes in the rates and communicate that to the ratepayers so they are able to make have an informed opinion. And then lastly, on transparency, tracking and retaining cost information. And that is something that we sometimes see and advocate for in these intra-utility consolidations, to say, okay, it's okay to consolidate the rates, but let's, track it separately so we at least have an idea, transparency-wise, of who's paying more and who's paying less. And then lastly, data needs for informed decision-making. To identify the data necessary that would enable rigorous analysis to allow for informed decision-making, and then to gather and analyze that data. So that's my last slide. I also wanted to say, it's that we have a wonderful state policy that ORA supports, saying that every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water. And I think the challenge for us all is how to enact this policy in a fair and balanced way. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzie. So before we go on to our next section, for those who are interested in engaging in the PUC's process, the PUC is a public advisor's office, and they're going to give a brief presentation on how to become a formal party to a PUC proceeding.
Hello, my name is Claudia Sanchez. I work for the Public Advisor's Office at the California Public Utilities Commission. And I'm just going to give some brief information on our subscription service, how to become a party, and just a brief mention of our intervenor compensation program. So the subscription service that we offer, it's a free service. You do have to have a valid email, but it basically allows members of the public to stay informed on proceedings that might interest them. It offers a lot of flexibility as far as what you can, how you want to subscribe for documents. You can subscribe to proceeding-specific documents, industry documents, or a specific type of document, like press releases. You don't actually get the document emailed to you. How it works is you will get an email notification saying that something's been published to our website, and then that link will have the document. Sorry. It's a little delayed. I don't know if most of you are familiar, and I'll discuss this later as well, with our with the service list. It's a little delayed to the service list just because that the subscription list, sorry, they have to wait till it's approved by our docket office. So you're not immediately getting the documents, but it's only like a few days. We have a table outside. You may have seen it when you walked in. We have several brochures on basic information about the commission. One of them is regarding the subscription service. So if you have any questions about it, you can come out and speak with us at any time. Take a brochure. We have tons of them. The next subject is becoming a party. So this is the commission's way of having the public participate formally. Basically, there's different ways you can become a party. There's about the first most common one is to do it at what we call a pre-hearing conference. Okay. There's the other ways are also by filing when you file an application, a petition, or if you file a formal complaint, you automatically become a party to those proceedings. If you're the defendant to a complaint or respondent to an investigation or ruling, I realize some people may not be familiar with the jargon that I'm using. So if you have any questions, we are available outside for any type of questions that you may have. You can also file a motion to become a party. That's basically, you would do that with the judge of the proceeding that you're interested in. There are some there are some certain rules that you have to follow if you're granted party status. Basically, you have to actually participate in the proceedings. So they want you have the ability to present witnesses and evidence and file motions, petitions, objections, and briefs. And the other parties have that right as well to do to your witnesses. It's more than kind of just saying, I don't agree with whatever the case may be, a rate increase or something. There are also certain responsibilities and expectations of parties. So anything that you might want to submit has to be sent to everybody in a formal manner. The documents have to be served on all the parties. Like I said, your witnesses must be available for cross-examination. And you have to be available to respond to data requests in a timely manner. And all that has to be done if you request it as well from other parties. So there's also certain types of proceedings where communication between someone like the commissioner or the presiding judge, they're either banned, or if they are allowed, they have to be reported. It's something that we call ex parte communications. We also have brochures on that, so if you have questions or don't know what that is, you can come outside and ask us. So if you're a person who's kind of just interested in the proceeding, but you're not really sure you can, you want to commit that much, then something like our service list would be a lot better, which is basically you get any documents that are filed to our website, you would get them sent in a link. So you'd have access to them. You'd have all the information, just you don't have to work at the proceeding. If you do become a party, we have a program called intervener compensation. Basically, it's for, excuse me, because participating in a CPUC proceeding, some proceedings can take up to 18 months. So we know that takes a lot of time and materials and costs money. So some parties, if they meet certain intervener requirements, the commission will cover some of the costs that they had put out to participate. Sorry. There's a few stipulations to, if you qualify. First, you have to be a party to the proceeding. Then you have to submit certain documents, basically notifying the judge and the commissioner that's involved in that proceeding that you intend to claim intervener compensation. And then it has to actually be granted to you. And any kind of payment that's issued to you is actually after the fact. So you always want to keep that in mind, that you have to cover the costs up front. If you are granted intervener eligibility, to receive it, you have to be, you still have to file papers after the fact. And like I said, this is all, the payment is done after the final decision is issued. We at the Public Advisor's Office don't actually handle intervener compensation too much, but we do get the questions about it. So if you have any questions about it, we have a brochure on that. And they are actually really good about, we have an intervener compensation group at the commission, and they're very good about responding and answering the phone. And so if you want more information on that, we are outside as well. I think that's all I was told.
Thank you. And I'll just add that for those who may not be aware, I used to work at the PUC, at the Ratepayer Advocate many years ago, and the PUC process for engagement and becoming a party has become much better. So it's easier now than it used to be, and the website's a lot easier to navigate. All right, so we're going to go on to the second component of this workshop today, which is two presentations from water utilities that have actually gone through the acquisition or consolidation process to share their experiences and some recommendations they have. So first will be Paul Jones and from the Eastern Municipal Water District.
Thank you, Max, and thank you for your disclosure regarding your prior employment with the PUC. We appreciate that. My name is Paul Jones. I'm General Manager of Eastern Municipal Water District. We're located in Riverside County. I want to talk to you a little bit today about consolidations that I've been involved in, and really look and talk about some of the consolidations I was involved in my former employer, Irvine Ranch Water District. Also a consolidation we're involved in Eastern Municipal Water District, which I think is very applicable to the situation we're seeing statewide and the challenges that we're facing statewide. I want to talk about what were the drivers for the consolidations, what did we consider when we enacted these, relating these experiences to this statewide challenge and additional governance concept that I'd like to kind of float out as an idea that might be another tool in the toolbox that could help resolve the challenges we're seeing in the dilemma of these failing water systems on a statewide basis. So with that, just a little background, 30 seconds on Irvine Ranch Water District. I was a general manager there for 13 years. Irvine Ranch is located in the central portion of Orange County. It's a very fairly large system, serves a population of about 390,000. Water, wastewater, recycled water. It's about a 179 square mile system and has all parts of 6 cities and an unincorporated county. My current district where I serve now is Eastern Municipal Water District. We are even yet a larger agency. We serve about 804,000 people in the western portion of Riverside County. Eastern has a lot of economically challenged areas. I'll talk about that. Disadvantaged communities. We serve 146,000 water customers. We also serve more sewer customers because we have districts that we wholesale to in our service area. Again, our service area is about 555 square miles. We have a lot of ag, small communities, unincorporated county. So what I want to talk about is the consolidations and a little bit of a background as a framework for this. At Irvine Ranch, we implemented 5 consolidations of various sizes, shapes, dimensions with different agencies. Starting on the upper left was a consolidation in January 1999 with a small irrigation district. That irrigation district had 2 employees and 5 board members. They had 1 irrigation line that was failing, and so they consolidated to receive additional service. On the lower left and center left were 2 mutual water companies that were consolidated with Irvine Ranch, the Orange Park Acres Mutual Water Company and the Santa Ana Heights Mutual Water Company. Orange Park Acres was about 1,500 service connections. In an affluent area, their primary issue was maintenance of their system and cost pressures. Santa Ana Heights Mutual Water Company was actually a large system, probably the least applicable to what we're going to be talking about today, 10,000 service connections, but they felt the need for a redundant source of water in addition to their groundwater, and that was their primary motivation for consolidating. On the upper right was a consolidation with an agency called Santiago County Water District. So we had an irrigation district and 2 private mutual water companies, essentially. This was a public water agency formed under the County Water District Act. Irvine Ranch was formed under the California Water District Act. And that was consolidated with us in 2006 at about 2,500 service connections. You see the map there, it looks like a huge area. But the area was in primarily open space, a very low density hillside area. The issues that they had were system reliability and the ability to respond to emergencies. Area very susceptible to wildfires, and they didn't have the staff or resources to be able to deal with those issues. And then on the lower right was the Los Alisos Water District. That was a consolidation that occurred in 2001. That one was very interesting because it was almost a consolidation of semi-equals. They were smaller than Irvine Ranch, but served 43,000 customers, so they're a very good-sized system. They did water, wastewater, had a very developed recycled water system. They looked at consolidating, and their primary driver was a redundant water supply. They were primarily on imported water. They wanted to have access to groundwater. The sixth consolidation that I want to talk about, I'm going to spend a little bit more. In fact, the majority of my presentation on this was with a district or agency called the County Water Company of Riverside. This was really more like the situation that we're seeing in the rest of the state as far as failing water systems that cannot meet water quality or other standards. This dissolution occurred in December of 2015. I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. Disadvantaged community, privately held water company that consolidated into Eastern. So what were the drivers for these consolidations? Well, they varied based on the district that we were consolidating with. But water rate pressures from higher per customer costs relating to high administrative overhead, particularly the smaller districts. Regulatory compliance issues, scale efficiency, all those things really drove these consolidations. Also providing improved water quality. This was the absolute driver with the County Water Company of Riverside, that private water company who was not meeting water quality standards and was, in fact, had notices of violation. And then in the Los Alisos Water District, it was supply diversity. But water system conditions, inconsistency of service, all those things were drivers for these consolidations. And really, this, and when we participated in these consolidations, there were kind of 7 key things that we found were essential for successfully joining these agencies together. The first was willing parties. As when you have an agency-to-agency consolidation, because of the complexity, you cannot have a hostile takeover. It just doesn't happen very effectively at an agency level. You need to have cooperation all the way through the consolidation process, including up and to the LAFCO portion of that as well. The second was governance and representation. In all these instances, we had boards of directors that were dissolving themselves. And we needed to have a governance transition plan to ensure there was representation for those communities in the successor agency. Also, in some cases, in couple of the mutual water companies, the board members were also operating the system. Interestingly enough, they were being paid to do that, and so there was actually a financial disincentive for them to consolidate, and we needed to address that as well. Also, transition of rates and charges. We heard about earlier, you have kind of unequal rates and charges. How do you get those rates and charges on a uniform system fairly and equitably? Integration of the workforce. On the larger consolidations, that was certainly just a concern. System integration, and I don't just mean operating system. I also mean customer service, where you're acting and being one agency and really putting these agencies together as one. And also community issues and involvement. In many areas, these were the only kind of form of local government. In Santiago County Water District, for example, they used to have community meetings in the water district headquarters, which was a small house. They wanted that retained because the community needed to have a place to meet. The state board has on its website water partnership toolbox and reorganization approach. This is really excellent. I want to compliment the state board staff for putting that together. It's very comprehensive. It's a great toolbox. It really explains how to go through these consolidations. But I do want to say, when we're looking at the problem that I think is confronting our state right now, I'm not sure that those toolbox and these can really be used by some of these small failing systems to initiate these consolidations. This is a very, very complex process. You have engineering issues, operation issues, finance issues, legal issues for consolidation of the agencies. You're merging disparate benefit systems. I mean, consolidations are very complicated, and to look at the systems in this state that are really suffering the most, that are really most troubled, it's going to be very difficult for those systems to initiate these types of consolidation and use these tools effectively. So I want to take this period to really do the case study on the County Water Company of Riverside, because I think this is most analogous to what we're seeing throughout the state for these troubled water systems that are not able to serve water, particularly in some of the most disadvantaged communities in our state, and they're serving contaminated water. County Water Company was a privately held company by a husband and wife. That company was a system of 140 services. They served about 1,000 acres, severely disadvantaged community. I will say that husband and wife and they had run that system in. They did not have an active business license. They were not doing any filings with the PUC. They did not have a certified operator operating the system. They had a repair guy who would go and fix leaks and turn the well on and off, but he was not a certified operator. The facilities that they had were a substandard tank, which had a failing branch system. So they had a branch system. They would get a leak, and because the system was not looped, they would have portions of their system out of water for days. Because of the problems with the well would cycle on and off, and so there were times a day when they had pressure, other times a day they did not have pressure on the system. With this single source of water, they didn't have any way to correct for that, and the well had frequent outages. The well water was also contaminated, and had been contaminated for over a decade. It had nitrate levels from 50 to 75 milligrams per liter. The MCL was 4 to 5. Very high levels of bacterial contamination. This water was not fit for human consumption. And this was in the middle of Riverside County. It's pretty amazing to think about that. They have multiple notices of violation from the health department. And the system just continued to operate on. And what was interesting is because the system was so bad, people stopped paying their bills and just kind of walked away from the whole thing. And so it was on the verge of collapse. This shows some pictures of the system. That's their equipment storage. You can see their well building there. I was in the office with Debbie Cherney yesterday. I have this plastic action figurine that was inside the well building sitting on the well. And so there are kids playing in there. There was an open electrical panel, high voltage electrical panel right next to the well. And so this was not only a water health hazard, this was a public health hazard all the way around. So you can see they had an inoperable meter. They had one fire hydrant for 1,000 acres. And that fire hydrant did not have sufficient pressure to meet fire flows for the system. But other than that, it was a great system. I'm just telling you that right now. So the solution that we came up with was we partnered with an adjacent agency, Elsinore Valley Municipal Water District, and we first started out with getting that system off of that well water. So we ran a mile invasion line from an existing system and took the well offline while we worked with county health officials, worked through LAFCO, and worked with the state and the county, as I'll talk about in a moment, to convert this system over to public ownership. It required $5.8 million of investment. So we applied for 2 grants. Elsinore got a grant and we got a grant, invested that into the system. The system was then divided into 2 systems. But at the same time, and while we were doing this, we had the problem with the ownership of the system. And so we met with the county water company, put a consolidation agreement together, and they stipulated to be put in receivership. They realized that this was not an asset. This was a liability. The book value on this system was nothing, and they had outstanding health violations, and they could not afford that system. And they agreed basically to put it into receivership and transfer those assets to a receiver. Now, in our case, the receiver was the County Economic Development Agency. So they held the system in receivership while the public agencies took the grant funding, rebuilt the system. We contract operated it for the receiver during that period. And at the end of 2016, essentially the county transferred all the assets of the system to the 2 public agencies and dissolved that. We also had 2 LAFCO annexations that needed to happen because you had a private water company that went out of business, and then you had to annex these areas into our 2 districts. We had a Metropolitan Water District annexation we had to effect. And then probably the most significant issue was our board, as the Elsinore board, was very concerned about taking on the liability of this water system. They've been serving contaminated water to customers for over a decade. And our board was concerned about what the implications, legal implications might be and the liability implications on our customers of taking over that system. So we basically sponsored and passed in 2014 SB 1130 Roth. This dealt with this liability question. It basically said our agencies were not responsible for the acts of the previous owner in any of that liability. This was subsequently converted into Health and Safety Code 116684 through SB 88, which was the 2015 budget trailer bill, and I think is really a good benchmark for addressing that liability issue. So I now want to kind of step back and say, let's look at this in context of the statewide challenge that we have. And I think we saw some of these statistics earlier, but I think they're really important. And we really have to acknowledge what the problem is. You know, we talk about consolidations, we talk about putting funding together for these systems, but I find if you really look at the data, it can really put the problem in the correct dimension and potentially lead to some solutions or identify deficiencies in your existing solution set. So if you look at the systems that are listed in the state drinking water database that are in violation of the 2017 database, 84% of those systems are basically the non-compliant systems serve less than 1,000 people. That's about 400 service connections or less. So in the old 80-20 rule, the vast majority of this problem are these micro, very, very small systems. Now, I don't want to indict every small system in the state, and I'm not doing that. There are small systems that are quite well run, but if you look at the dimension of the problem that we're talking about and the systems that are in violation, they're clearly these very small systems. And 70% of those non-compliant water systems are privately owned or mutual water companies, just like the county water company that we had. And because they're not under Cortese-Knox, they're not can't be consolidated under LAFCO, it creates all sorts of issues associated with that. So in taking that a little bit further, what are some of the common issues? Now we've kind of identified the types of systems that are non-compliant. What do we see as the common issues? Well, I think first, there's a lack of technical, managerial, and financial capabilities. When you have a system of 400 people, you just don't have the staff to be able to run that, nor can you afford it. And I think countering that, you have very high proportional administrative overhead. You know, each one of these systems needs a manager, an attorney, they need to have an accountant, they need to do audits, they need to meet payroll and conduct payroll, they have to send out bills. When you're talking about 1 or 2 people, that is very, very difficult. And it's very difficult to spread those costs over 400 customers. It just doesn't make sense economically. And in today's contemporary requirements for water service for agencies, it just doesn't work. You also have, as I mentioned earlier, having an entity of that size initiate a consolidation and do all the very complex things that we had to do to consolidate those agencies is just daunting. It's too complex. And there's some incompatibilities also with these private systems and public agencies. I think a bigger policy question, and this goes to the funding, and you know, there's certainly a discussion about supplemental funding from these systems, whether it's a public goods charge, whether it's general fund transfers. I am going to talk about that a little bit today. But the question is, if you have a funding source, an outside funding source, and you're applying it to these systems, does that really make sense? I mean, if you think about it, you've got a privately held system that's operationally failing, that's surveying contaminated water, and you're going to give a public bailout for that, and basically enhance the value of that system for that owner who ran that system into the ground. I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense from a public policy standpoint. But again, those systems need to be addressed, and we need to serve water from those systems that meets the public needs. But I think it's a public policy question we really need to get on the table. But to me, when I look at this, and when we look at this, we've got a governance problem. There's a funding problem, but there's also a governance problem. And the governance problem is really focused on these very, very small systems and their long-term viability. So when we've looked at this problem, we say, is there a better public governance structure? And I know we've heard from PUC regulated agencies, and I think they have some great ideas too. But is there a public governance structure that really fits the problem? Because right now, I'm not sure we have a public governance system that fits the problem. You know, agencies, a larger agency to take on one of these small failing systems, there's really not a lot of incentive there. And so can we come up with a system that fits the problem? So what was that problem? The lack of technical expertise and resources. The geographic dispersion, that's another issue. Sometimes these are embedded in the middle of a county. Sometimes they're all over the place, and they're not adjacent. You can't build a pipeline from one to the other. Or they're not adjacent to a big system where a big system would want to consolidate with them. Unattractive to consolidate from other agencies. There's nobody stepping up to the plate. Some of these systems are in such bad shape. The administrative inefficiencies of these smaller systems and trying to address that. There's an inadequate financial base. And, you know, we talk about supplementing and providing revenues for these systems, but if you could get them so they could finance things, get grants, use those things, because not only is it difficult for them to get these things, but even to use these things. You could provide a grant to this small failing system, but do they have the sophistication to be able to use that grant to repair their system and continue to operate that system on an ongoing basis? There's the issue of the public money, enhancing a private asset, essentially. And so, you know, one of the things we talked about is, could there be another type of solution, a public agency solution, that could be put together to address some of these issues and move another option in the toolbox forward? So we came up with a concept we call kind of a regional small water authority. And what would that be? Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of types of water districts in the state. We're all created by statutes of the state of California and different enabling statutes. We are a municipal water district. There's California water districts. There's county water districts. There's water authorities. They all have different capabilities and authorities, and they're given different tools that they can use to address the problem. So maybe what we need to think about is having the legislature form a type of water authority that fits the problem, that we can use to address the problem, and also gives those areas in a consolidated fashion the ability to address some of the issues and to provide mechanisms for sustainability of those systems. So one idea is you could form a new type of water entity under the state of California statutes. It could have multiple contiguous system boundaries, be an independent special district. It could be at a county or a sub-county level, whatever needed to consolidate some of these agencies. You would give it authorities, rate-making authority, obviously, but taxing authority, the authority to put standby assessments in to raise revenue, the authority to put assessments on property eventually adjacent to these systems that may have actually contributed to the contamination of some of the wells that they're drinking contaminated water from, and so on. So also, if you have a critical mass, you now have capability to be able to apply for grants and loans, to get tax-free municipal financing, so you can finance improvements over 30 years versus having to pay in current revenues. And also to address some of these issues of how you could use public money coming in to fix some of these systems. And I think most importantly, you would provide representative governance. So you would be consolidating systems, and if you think about it, you're consolidating equals. It's not a big system taking over a smaller system. You're consolidating equals and giving them the tools that they need to be able to sustain themselves. And I think that's what we're thinking. So what would be some of the benefits? Now, this map is for, I'm going to disclosure, this map is for illustrative purposes. I'm not proposing consolidation of these systems, so let's get on that. But we started to take the state's database and really break it down. And it's kind of interesting what you really see from that. The red stars are mutual or private water companies. There's public agencies and green stars and school systems. So what we found, we started to think about what would be the advantages of this, where you could form these regional authorities. The regional authority would then dissolve the mutual water companies into the regional authority and then serve all those systems simultaneously. First, you're obviously going to get the efficiencies, the economies of scale that will lower costs overall. I think it was mentioned that you have some of these small systems, they're paying pretty high bills in some cases. And because of all that administrative overhead, this is an opportunity for them to get better service and pay lower bills at the same time. That's not a forced consolidation among unequals. It's equal agencies coming together. There's a substantial reduction in small systems. When I talked about this to Max said, oh, that's all we need is another public water agency. And I said, well, Max, but if you consolidate multiple agencies, you're actually ending up with fewer water agencies. In this illustrative example, you see a cluster of 17 systems, a cluster of 6 systems, a cluster of 18 systems. You would go from 41 entities that need to be regulated to 3. And so you would have a net reduction in the number of these systems. And it also gives the, a larger rate base, the alternative revenue sources that a mutual water company doesn't have. They can't get tax-exempt financing. They can't do assessments. These would give them tools that they can use for those things. And also, I think once you put this in place, it's going to give us all a much better ability to figure out how much supplemental funding these systems are going to need. So if they're able to do some self-funding and they're able to do financing, it would really give a better handle on if public goods charge or general fund contributions were needed, more precisely how much would be needed to make these systems successful. And also you consider in that affordability of the customers, particularly in these disadvantaged communities. So with that, I just want to wrap up here, and I appreciate your attention on this. Really, consolidations and reorganizations are a valuable tool. We've seen that they've been a valuable tool. Every single one of those consolidations I described that we're involved in resulted in lower rates and better service for those customers. They were voluntary, and they were voluntary for a reason. I think the customers worked together, and the owners of those systems and the public agencies who consolidated realized that was a benefit. But I think the majority of the problem we're talking about is with these very small public or private or mutual water company systems. And we really need a solution set that focuses on that. And that's what I'm concerned about, is we're talking about funding, we're talking about bringing in supplemental funding, but we really don't have the other half solved. And the other half is this governance in my mind. It's the elephant in the room. And it really is. Nobody wants to talk about dissolving these little water districts and doing what you need to do, but it is the elephant in the room. And I think we all realistically need to address it and have a good, honest conversation about it if we're going to really address these failing systems. And I think the state could resolve this and give another tool by considering a statutory solution to provide and form a new type of water agency. And then that would also give the opportunity to look at how much supplemental funding do we need to make these systems sustainable, and what is the right sizing for that. So with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. There's a lot to think about there. It's an interesting concept. So now we're going to hear from the private side about experience with consolidation, and I think we'll start with Evan Jacobs from California American.
Make sure I have this right. Thank you, Max. Thank you, board members, commissioner. My name's Evan Jacobs. I'm with California American Water and their external affairs team. Also joining me for part of this presentation is Tim Miller, who is our Senior Director of Water Quality and Environmental Compliance. As folks, many in this room may know, but not everyone, California American Water is a Class A private investor-owned water utility. We serve almost 700,000 Californians in 30 systems throughout the state. Smallest system is about 50 connections. Largest system is about 40,000 connections. So that gives you some idea of our diversity. At our company, we have been very involved in this issue for several years. I'm very proud of the contributions we have made to help address some of the problems with these failing systems. Specifically, we have, since 2013, acquired 6 water systems, and we have 1 pending, and that's the one Rami mentioned recently in his presentation, which is Fruit Ridge Vista here in Sacramento area. We believe that acquisitions and consolidation are good for our customers, they're good for our company, they're good for the systems we're acquiring because we do bring that technical, managerial, financial expertise with us, and we help them address the problems they have. In the context of this workshop, not every consolidation we have done, not every acquisition we have done is of a small disadvantaged community, but many of them have been. And there seems to be a common thread there, whether or not they are disadvantaged. They suffer many of the same problems in terms of water quality, high costs, lack of that expertise to effectively manage the system. This was covered in some detail already, but we kind of see three different types of consolidation. The first is the physical consolidation, where we interconnect one water system to another. That is a solution many times, if it's available with proximity, for some of these systems that have poor water quality. Rate consolidation is another important one to help deal with affordability. I won't say a lot in this context. I think Suzie did a great job covering the concepts behind it, and we have some pending matters before the PUC. Don't want to violate those ex parte rules. Third consolidation factor consideration is managerial and labor, and those are very important ones because, as we talked about with many of these systems, and as our examples will show, you will see that oftentimes the skills, the technical skills are not there, aging workforce, things like that that are creating problems with these systems. So with that, I'll ask Tim to come on up. I guess one other thing I would say really quickly is, as we have done these 6 consolidations, we've worked very closely with the PUC, Water Division, they've been great help, and with the State Water Board. The Division of Financial Assistance has worked closely with us on a couple of these. I think we've very successfully addressed the concerns to make sure that there's no benefit from public funds flowing to a private entity. The real purpose of getting financial assistance is to make sure we're not putting an undue rate burden on our existing customers as we go over those consolidations. I think we have very good procedures in place on that. And then definitely Division of Drinking Water has been a great partner as well. So thank you to all of them.
So I was just going to give an overview of some of the operational challenges and solutions that we've experienced in some of these consolidations, covering 3 of the 6 acquisitions we've done recently. One of those, the Dunnigan system, 243 customers. It's both water and wastewater service. It's in northern Yolo County, just up Interstate 5 from here. One of the first acquisitions we've done recently was the Garrapatta water system in Monterey County, just south of the 6 cities serving the peninsula. That was a small investor-owned utility. It was a one-person shop. It had a number of challenges that we'll get into. And then also Adams Ranch was a mutual water company that was literally surrounded by one of our larger systems in Los Angeles County. So as Evan indicated, some of the common challenges that we see are water quality issues, source of supply issues, and then rates comes along with that. Some of the things we've discovered going through the process that's very interesting is any number of unexpected operational issues. Data integration has been a very interesting challenge for us. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then the customer relations piece becomes very interesting as you're moving into new communities. So looking at the Dunnigan system, again, 243 customers, water and wastewater service. Biggest problem it had, chromium-6, running in the anywhere from 35 to 50 parts per billion range, so well over the, well, what was the MCL. And again, the cost estimates for that were in the range of over $600,000 for the treatment for that. You can imagine trying to spread that out over 243 customers, and wow, that's some rate shock for you. Also a number of operational issues. They had 2 supply wells. One was not very well maintained, had cracked concrete slab, all kinds of opportunities for bacterial intrusion. Their backup well was literally in the middle of the ticket booth for a RV park that the owners owned and associated with it. And it was also had its sanitary issues. You could basically go into the ticket booth and look down the well shaft and kind of look at everything that was going on there. So other interesting things that we experienced as we took this over and we're moving forward with it, the disinfection system was included in the building that housed the showers for the RV customers. So as we took it over, we needed to come up with, okay, well, how are we going to make sure that the disinfection system remains on property and accessed only by water company staff instead of someone wandering around up the stairs looking for the shower? Is another interesting issue. There are also a number of other safety issues. Evan will cover some of those later. So a number of operational issues we had to go into. So our solutions, we are moving forward with installing treatment for hexavalent chromium. Actually going to start construction on that relatively soon. The rate solution for that is the commission allowed the rates for the Dunnigan system to be consolidated with our other 9 Sacramento systems. So instead of spreading that cost out across 243 customers, it's getting spread out across 60,000. So definitely mitigated the rate impact there. We brought in our technical expertise. We're working through bringing in engineering contractors. The common element with all 3 of the systems we're going to talk about today is they were run by one person. There was always one person you'd go to that if you needed to know anything, and that was the only person who knew anything. How that person ever went on vacation or any of those other interesting things and ran the system, well, they don't have that problem anymore because we have brought in our expertise and our staff, engineering expertise, water quality expertise, general operational expertise. Another actual operational issue that was interesting, again, it was a wastewater system. They weren't in compliance with all the terms and condition of their waste discharge requirements, and nothing was being done about that. So we came in, immediately started making operational improvements and operational changes to implement some best practices, and then we're moving forward with some of the larger capital improvements that were required by those waste discharge requirements. And so again, we talked about the rate consolidation. Adams Ranch Mutual Water Company, this is a picture of the VOC treatment tower that was serving the only well that served this system. This was in central San Gabriel Valley. So this well was drawing from the main San Gabriel Basin, which is one of the few water supplies that is a Superfund site. Had contamination of trichloroethylene and tetrachloroethylene, had trichloroethylene in the mid to high teens, so about 3 times the MCL, and then also had tetrachloroethylene contamination going along with that. The system had one well. If that well failed, if the treatment system failed, fortunately they had an emergency interconnection with our system, but that was their only backup. One of the interesting, in addition to the water quality, again, there's that water supply. This was a situation with the aging workforce. The one guy was ready to retire, but he didn't have the resources to bring on a person, develop the staff, and have any kind of a succession plan that you get when you have government entities, investor-owned utilities that have staff and bring them along. So basically at this point, because of the water quality issues they had, we're running this system off of the existing interconnection. And they're getting water now from wells that have nowhere near the contamination problems that the Adams Ranch well had. And then of course we're bringing in our managerial expertise. Evan will talk about some of the other benefits that come with being in investor-owned utilities, conservation programs, assistance, and things like that. And then lastly is the Garrapatta water system. So again, water quality issues. When we took over this system, they had been under a boil water order for 10 years. It had one well immediately adjacent to Garrapatta Creek. It was groundwater under the direct influence of surface water. They did not have the proper treatment installed, and the person who owned the system did not have the technical, managerial, and financial expertise to deal with that problem. We actually came in at the request of Monterey County Health Department before we acquired the system and took over as a contract operator while they worked with the state and county to get a grant funding to bring in the appropriate treatment. We helped them get that up and running, and then we acquired the system after everything was fixed, and was able to bring in the managerial and technical expertise to actually run the treatment system that needed to be constructed. The older operator didn't have that ability. Also had a different water supply issue. The well drew directly from Garrapatta Creek. They were issued a cease and desist order by the Water Rights Division of the State Water Board because they were adversely affecting water levels in the creek. Again, didn't have the technical or managerial expertise to really do that. They hadn't even metered their customers. So you've got a water supply limitation and no way to send a price signal based on consumption to your customers. One of the things we did when we took over, came in and put in meters. And then again, aging workforce. The person who technically owned the system, I think at the point in time we came in as a contract operator, was close to bedridden. So there was a workforce issue there. So the grant funding that the older operator, the prior operator was able to get from the state to build the treatment system was very important in dealing with the rate issues. Again, only 50 customers, so rate issues there. And then again, just the planning. One of the challenges this system has is it's geographically remote. It's about a 30-minute drive south of the main cities of the Monterey Peninsula. Not easy to get people there quickly and have normal supplies and support for a water system that close. So having our operations relatively close on the Monterey Peninsula help with that. And again, our managerial expertise. With that, I'll turn it back over to Evan to talk about our Dunnigan electrical panel and a few other things.
Thanks, Tim. I wasn't going to name names here, and I have many examples from a variety of systems. If an electrician looked at this really closely, they would tell you that the red wire on my right is bypassing that circuit breaker right there, which means that circuit breaker was flipping, and they decided rather than fixing the circuit breaker, they would wire it into a continuous circuit. Really dangerous situation. When you take one of these systems over, the day you take it over, you own it. You own the good and the bad. And one of our operations managers likes to say it's like buying a used car. You can look under the hood, you can kick the tires, you can get the Carfax, but until you take it out and drive it a few miles, you don't know really what that car is like and how it drives. Taking over a water system is the same way. Again, I'm really proud of our staff because they're always able to jump in there and do a good job from day one. And we treat those customers that we're acquiring on that day the same way we've treated our customers we've had for years or decades. One other Dunnigan story I will tell you is December 30th, 2015, we took over the system. December 31st, 3 p.m., the raw water line from the well to the treatment plant failed. Raw water line broke. We had customers out of water. We had to roll our crews out on a New Year's Eve and get them out there to fix it. We did. We also found a second leak on a 4-inch valve that we were able to fix and replace that day. So one of the things we have learned as we've become more experienced with doing these takeovers is be ready for the unexpected, be ready to have some first day operational challenges. Some of the other lessons we've learned that I think are really important, customer communications and variety of things here. You need to communicate with those customers throughout the process to let them know what's going on. You need to be cognizant of language differences. We have a system in the Central Valley we acquired recently. Probably a third of the customers there speak Hmong. So we've actually had everything where all of our communications translated into Hmong as well as Spanish and English, because that's what the community needs. You also need to be cognizant of how the community communicates with one another. In one community, everybody may be on Nextdoor, and if you can get a message on a Nextdoor, that's the best way to communicate with them. In another community, there may be a message board, a bulletin board, or you may direct mail everybody, but finding those channels of communication, very important. Customer data, we've talked a lot about the operational challenges. Oftentimes, the IT infrastructure of these systems is every bit as outdated as the physical infrastructure. So when you are taking customer data, billing records, all of that information, production records, all of that, and trying to move it from one system to another, it's something that we've discovered is one of the biggest challenges of these consolidations and these acquisitions. Again, I'm very proud of our company. We are a large company. We serve more than 15 million people around America, including the almost 700,000 in California. We have resources. We have folks we can go to help us manage through those data challenges and get the job done timely in a good manner. Operational issues, I won't beat that horse. We've heard a lot about that today, but obviously there are always challenges, and once you do it, you need to own them and take them over. Ending on a positive note, the customer benefits. The really obvious one we've talked about today has been safe, affordable, reliable water supply. Enough cannot be said about that. That is so important, is a prerequisite for everything else we do. So number one, that is a customer benefit, getting those customers safe, clean water. I think some of the investor-owned utilities, we're very proud of our conservation programs. We offer great conservation programs and services. Everything from rebates to home water audits, devices, you name it, we have it. And oftentimes these smaller communities, smaller systems haven't had access to these programs. So being able to offer them, I think there's a real benefit to the customers and to the state on that. Low-income ratepayer assistance. Again, all of our Class A companies have very robust, good low-income ratepayer assistance programs. And being able to offer those to these communities is great, and it's one of the ways you can help offset some of the challenges with rising rates. And then customer service. Again, we're a large organization. We have employees in every community we serve, but we also have resources and expertise to provide really good customer service. And oftentimes these smaller systems, it was one person who was probably pretty friendly with their customers, but they did the billing, they did the engineering, they were dealing with the attorneys and turning the switches on the wells. We have that level of expertise to really improve customer service for these new customers. So I think that gets us to the end of our presentation. Thank you all for bearing with us, and look forward to any questions you have.
Thank you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick break, 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back and do public comment. So back at 3:10.
right, everybody.
There may be even some GSAs that, you know, I mean, we just created hundreds of new agencies.
Yeah, we're reeling. Just 290 new.
Hey, I kind of looked over at you.
That was actually said that. Yeah, so remember I said that at the hearing. I was like, how many spaces are there? 127. 293 to manage 127.
Yeah, love that. Just how few reports they're going to have. Great idea. The regulatory burden. But yeah, think about it. Yeah.
I like the thinking.
Yes. Well, maybe we can do some follow-up. Paul, have you met Michelle? You should. So, Michelle is one of our 2 staff who are responsible for doing consolidation.
All right.
And I enjoyed your presentation a lot. I just, the governance piece and the land use piece, it's so important and it's so understated. I don't know, do you know about what's going on like in Kentucky? They had, I'll give you my card.
yeah.
We can talk about it at a later date, but they did something similar where they looked at the governance and they have gone from having like 2,400 public water systems, and it was over a 40-year period, down to like 400 or so.
Yeah.
With that idea of pulling everybody together, they looked through the maps and they tried to figure out how do we do this on a bigger scale.
We took your spreadsheet, which was great, and it's Excel. We sorted it, and it kind of jumped out at us.
Yeah, I mean that's what we're seeing too, just as we're calling through the data.
I saw Max and Don Ortega, who represents the mutual water company guys, texted me. He just emailed me and he said, I like your idea. It's really good. Let's talk about it. So it's good.
It's good.
I thought it wasn't like a death text.
I think a lot of people have death threats.
I can't cut people off.
Said 2 minutes. I think we just do water, right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, excellent. Excellent. I would like to talk to you guys more about any ideas you might have on this. We'd like to develop a legislative outline.
I would love that. Yeah.
Max said, we don't just want you to present on what you've done. We want your ideas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. JPA is a JPA. Yeah, you still have 2 entities that exist.
All right, we're going to try to get started again. We went a little long on break, so if you could cut your conversations and take your seats again. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to do public comment.
Okay, so we have so far about 10 cards, and we're going to limit public comment to 5 minutes. Many of you said all you needed was 2 minutes, so as long as you don't go over 5, and of course, depending on what all you have to say, maybe, you know, we'll have some flexibility here. Trying to get out of here by 4 o'clock. And before getting started, I would like to acknowledge former board member Fran Spivey-Weber. Hello. Well, we just want to thank you for your long-standing service and for your commitment to the human right to water. And we're just thrilled to have you here today. Would love to hear from you if you have anything to say. So thank you. All right, so the first speaker is, or first commenter, Jim Stone, Deputy Public Works Director, San Joaquin County.
Thank you very much for, this has been a good session. San Joaquin County operates 32 small water systems that are dependent special districts. A few are maintenance districts, most are community service districts or community service areas. 22 of those 32 serve less than 100 customers. Virtually none of them are disadvantaged communities, and we don't really have the problems with, fortunately, the quality. You know, we do have the expertise and have enough funding to operate them, but a lot of them need to be consolidated. It's very difficult to adjust rates because we're subject to Prop 218, and a majority protest, if you have 10,000 customers, is very difficult when you have a system with 20 customers or 30 customers. So in many cases, we have barely sufficient rates to operate the system, but we don't have sufficient rates for any kind of a capital reserve, and these are aging systems that in many cases are going to need significant funding not far in the future. Sometimes we have 9 districts that are contiguous to each other, that are physically interconnected, that pay essentially the same rates, and they won't consolidate. And we have to go through the LAFCO process. Again, that's a majority protest if the majority of any of the districts that are trying to consolidate oppose it. So I am here mainly to say we agree that what we have is a governance issue. And we need a way of getting around the problem of consolidation of districts. We really need to be able to consolidate those 32 districts into probably 3 or 4, and/or it is also an issue, many of those are contiguous to city systems, and the cities don't want them, and that's largely a water capacity issue. They don't want to give up the capacity. You know, they don't want our customers to come in because that capacity to them is for their customers and their future customers. So that's one issue, but our biggest issue is the governance, and we fully agree there needs to be some sort of a legislative fix to make it more reasonable for consolidation of these small public systems. In our case, the dependent special districts where we have to go through the LAFCO process currently. So something that would exempt those water districts from the LAFCO or change that procedure would be great for us. So thank you.
Okay, next is James Bollier, Ratepayer. James, B-O-U-L-E-R. That's you, okay. I must have butchered your last name. Please pronounce it.
My name is James Bowler. It's spelled B-O-U-L-E-R. I live in Sonoma County. Our community is served by California American Water Company. Basically, this workshop is advertised to be about providing safe drinking water through consolidation of districts. The flyer announcing this event describes the Public Utilities Commission role in the consolidation and the resources of Control Board role in consolidation as being one and the same. They are not. Under the heading CPUC roles in water system consolidation, The last sentence reads, in addition, since 2014, the PUC has required its large multi-district water utilities to bring forth consolidation proposals to increase the affordability of water for their customers. In fact, in 2014, the PUC eliminated the long-standing rules for consolidation of districts. There are no rules. The utilities themselves are writing their own rules for consolidation within their ownership. And what we will wind up with is 6 different consolidation procedures, one for each of the 6 multi-district water, Class A water companies. What is not made clear is that the order applies only to the 6 regulated multi-district Class A water companies. It does not apply to any of the 99 Class B, Class C, or Class D water companies. It is a subsidy program whereby the low-cost areas will have their rates increased so that the money can be used to subsidize the high-cost areas. We believe that to be illegal. The PUC's consolidation program will not benefit a single one of those 300 disadvantaged communities. To the commissioners who are present here today, I have some questions. The rate structure that is now in place for the Class A water companies came about entirely through the actions of the water companies with some generous help from the Public Utilities Commission. Why now does the entire burden of rate stabilization fall upon ratepayers? Why aren't the water companies being required to contribute financially toward rate stabilization? After all, they created this mess. Why isn't the Public Utilities Commission contributing financially toward rate stabilization? They approved everything that the water companies did. We are now being victimized. Well, the only involvement by ratepayers in this fiasco has been to be victims of it. We're now being victimized yet again by the very people who are supposed to protect us. Under the heading State Water Board Role in System Consolidation, the flyer discusses the authority given to the Water Board under Senate Bill 88, in which they have the authority to force mergers of water systems where one is failing to meet safe drinking water standards. This does in fact have the potential of benefiting some of those 300 communities, depending upon how it's implemented. It should not become another subsidy program. People who are served by publicly owned water utilities are afforded some rights and protections by Articles 13C and 13D of the California Constitution. If you attempt to merge a publicly owned water utility with a regulated utility, you will be depriving the ratepayers of the publicly owned utility some of their constitutional rights and protections. We do not believe that Senate Bill 88 gives you that authority. Further, we do not believe that any Senate bill or any Assembly bill can give you that authority. I am happy that CalAm used Dunnigan as an example of consolidation. To me, Dunnigan should be used as a horrible example of misuse of consolidation and of misuse of the Water Investment and Consolidation Act of 1997. Dunnigan is a small community in Yolo County on Highway 5, about 18 miles north of Woodland, about 3 miles south of the Colusa County line. There are 243 connections serving a mobile home park and an RV park. There's a sewer system also. As these guys pointed out, there are considerable deficiencies in the Dunnigan system that's going to be expensive to repair. Crack seal in one of the wells in the bathhouse of the RV park in property that is not being transferred through the transfer of assets. Presence of chromium-6 and other contaminants.
I think they've already spoken to the situation there. Maybe if you could provide just a wrap-up.
The proposal to purchase Dunnigan included a proposal to consolidate it with Sacramento. The idea there being that the people in Sacramento and West Plaza counties would pay most of the cost of correcting those deficiencies in Dunnigan. Further, Yolo County has considerable growth slated for Dunnigan. Yolo County officials will determine how much and what type of development, and therefore what kind of expansion. Sacramento County and West Plaza County gets to pay for most of that expansion without a voice in it.
All right. Well, thank you for your comments, and we have your written comments. We appreciate that. Thank you. All right. Next is Don Reidenauer, General Manager, Sunny Slope County Water District.
Good afternoon. Sunny Slope County Water District is a public utility in San Benito County. I think of it as quite small. We serve under 6,000 connections and probably about 20,000 residents. We have a number of small utilities around us that I have no doubt one of these days will be looked at as forcing them to merge with our district, and that concerns me and the board I represent here in that none of them are disadvantaged. We pay, or our customers in our district pay significantly higher rates than these small systems around us. We have a couple mutuals, a county service area, and another public water system, and actually a fifth that just provides sewer service. All of these, I mean, it comes down to cost. I think they deserve clean water to drink, but it comes at a cost. And how, with Prop 218 and other regulatory issues, how do I consolidate rates if I'm forced to take on a system like that or another system I'm not aware of that local planning agencies approve over time? How am I to consolidate those rates with my existing customers that I'm hired to represent? It really doesn't come down to what I think those people personally need. It comes down to who I'm hired to represent and control costs for. Our system is fairly well funded. We have very high water rates and we have very high sewer rates. And we're doing our best to meet all the regulatory compliance issues. Chromium-6 is an issue in our community, which is likely at some point in the future, maybe it'll be 18 months or 24 months before we see the next regulation, will drive at least a couple of these to look seriously at consolidation. I like the one gentleman's idea of another government structure. Maybe those agencies ought to be looked at being forced to combine rather than, having those small systems forced upon a larger system that has done a good job of taking care of their system. I drive through those little communities. I've met with them, talked with them about their improvements. We provide technical assistance at times. They have a lot of issues. They have tanks that haven't seen, if any, inspection ever, very few in the last, few decades. And I can only imagine what the rest of their system, is really, what condition it's in. So it does really come down to cost. And how do you push that cost on to somebody else? Rate consolidation is an interesting, term to be used. And I guess the private sector is allowed to do that. Public agencies, I think the rules are a little different for us. We're not even allowed to have a subsidy for low-income residents, at least currently. Maybe we will in the next year or two, or who knows when, but at least not without another funding source other than rates. And we're a district, we're not a city. We don't have a general fund, source of funding to subsidize someone's rates. So, it really always comes back to cost. And then my fear is what's next? We're talking about water consolidation. Sewer's right around the corner, and I'm looking at 2 sewer systems right adjacent or nearly adjacent to the district I represent. We just spent a fortune on a sewer plant, and it's, we hear about it every month when the bills go out, about the cost of sewer. We're the most expensive sewer in our kind of county or community. I'm looking at 2 sewer systems next to me that they have the same violations and same issues that we had. So it always comes down to cost. I see we talk about loans. They're loans. They have to be paid back. They come with lots of strings attached. They come with prevailing wage requirements of these mutuals and so on. I hear assistance up to this amount of money. I don't hear that we're going to cover those costs. Oh, there's all these, and our customers hear those things. Oh, why don't you go get a grant for these things? It isn't easy for a little system to go chase down a grant. We don't have grant writers on our staff. I think of us as small, and yet we're in the majority of the large agencies in the state, but I still think of us as small. We're a staff of 22. We do have the expertise to run our system. We don't have the expertise to go chase down and run a bunch of other little systems that need to be rebuilt. Frankly, they shouldn't have been approved. I like the fact that the state will be able to maybe approve or say no to some of these systems being created, because there's some being considered in our county, and they'll just be the next problem 20 years from now when they've been run into the ground by whoever that operator is or isn't. A couple of these mutuals, and I feel for their board members. They have trouble even getting board members to help run them. They don't want the responsibility or the liability. So it always comes down to cost. And who is going to suffer, who's going to pay that cost for providing that safe, reliable water to whoever that customer is, whether they're disadvantaged or not. That's what it comes down to. So I hope you really do consider them case by case. We happen to have issues. We have federal water. We have boundary. We have benefit districts that were formed. They're federal boundaries. 2 of those districts that I'm concerned about, we can't serve them just out of our general system. We have federal water that can't cross that boundary. So how do we go about serving them? We've already had these discussions with the Division of Drinking Water, tried to explain that to them, and they get it, but they smile, because I know the day will come. So I guess we'll be going to the federal government to amend those boundaries. You get back to water supply, connection fees. We charge a lot to connect to our system for new development that we don't have a say in, really. We're a district that responds to the planning agencies around us. Who pays that? Is it these, small little systems that they're from 18 to about 120 customers of these little agencies around us? And that's just the ones I know of. I'm sure there's a few others out there that are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that are not too distantly far from those. So just look at them case by case and consider who really is, taking on that burden of the expense. And it's not just the capital cost initially, it's the 20 years of bringing a system into compliance and fixing all those little issues that come up. It's the administrative work that goes with that too.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here. Okay, next is Jack Hawks, California Water Association.
Thank you, Board Member D'Adamo and Board Member Moore and Commissioner Guzman Aceves. I just wanted to, Jack Hawks, California Water Association, representing the PUC regulated utilities. Just want to clarify a couple of things. Darren Polheim has talked about 7,500 public water systems. Of that total, only 100 are regulated by the PUC, and those 100 serve about 6 million Californians. Paul referenced the 70% of the water quality violations coming from the mutuals and the private systems, but that's not the PUC regulated systems. The PUC systems are, yes, they're privately owned, but they're regulated public utilities. And so I just want to make sure that nobody has that misconception. Also, Paul mentioned the grant issue, and I just want to make sure everybody understands that when a PUC regulated utility gets a grant, either if it's for its own system or if it's for an acquisition and money used to help the acquired system, that money does not go into the rate base. It's not part of the rate calculation. It's a separate accounning financial mechanism, and it's and the reason it's quite valid for a PUC regulated utility to get a grant is because their customers are the taxpayers that are paying for the bond that underpins that grant in the first place. So that's another point I just wanted to clarify. With respect to Mr. Boland, he's hit upon the big issue, policy issue. It's the policy issue for the Water Board and for the PUC, for the legislature, the governor's office. How do you handle the rate situation after an acquisition when there has to be a tremendous amount of money invested in the acquired system, or if the acquired system's already in a high-cost region? The only way it works is, grants can only go so far, is to get the economies of scale and spread those costs as much as you can. And so what happens is that in the initial period, there is indeed intra-ratepayer subsidy, but over time, that actually evens out. In Mr. Boland's example, Cal-Am will be doing capital work in the Sacramento district, and the Dunnigan ratepayers, dollars through their bills, some of that money will be going to help their Sacramento district customers in the same way that the Sacramento district customers are helping right now with Dunnigan. In about 10 years, that'll even out. And the other states recognize this. Public policy makers absolutely recognize this. The state of Connecticut actually went down the SB 88 path a few years ago. They wanted to encourage consolidation, acquisitions. And so they actually, they now have a regulation that does exactly the opposite of what we're talking about here. They require now an acquired systems rates to be subsumed into the larger systems rate so that the economies of scale benefits can happen right away. And then over time, as I just said, the acquiring systems customers will benefit when the utility comes and does whatever capital needs are done in improvements in its area. So it's over time, it'll work out. But you're right, the dislocation happens in the initial time frame, which is what's going on with Dunnigan right now in these acquired systems. But you have to weigh that against the benefits that Darren talked about on public health and safety of acquiring these troubled systems and taking care of them. Rami talked about in the last decade, 33 systems. Just since in the last 5 years and since SB 88 was actually covered, we've done about 17 acquisitions, and they're spread, some of them are IOUs, as Rami said, some are mutuals, one community services district. So that's, the SB 88's working for us from a voluntary standpoint, and we were so glad to get that liability language into the bill. And just one last thing, the public, what you call the regional small system public authority, Paul? Yeah, we actually have a company that does exactly what Paul described. It's Del Oro Water Company. That's a small system that has gone around over the last 50 years and acquired small districts, and they've now got about 17 or 18 districts, and it's regulated by the PUC. So if the board or the legislature goes down this path, they certainly talk to Rami about how Del Oro has managed this, because it's not a large system, it's a small system, and again, trying to handle bring these synergies to bear, and their districts are spread all over the state too. So thank you for giving me a little extra time.
Interesting. Okay, Phoebe Seaton, Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. Having this workshop, as I think most folks here know, we're big fans of consolidation and would like to see a lot of the recommendations that came out today incorporated, and the kind of the authority and utility and utilization of consolidations expanded. Based on our experience, a couple of the issues that I think would like to see more attention to are making sure that we can use the authority and especially the incentives to get to domestic wells. We've seen some lack of clarity there and want to just make sure that we can address, again, those most vulnerable probably of all Californians who are on domestic wells. We just got a call yesterday, despite the drought being over and there not being any problem of groundwater anymore, that a neighborhood outside of Crothers doesn't have water anymore. So definitely need to reduce and address that vulnerability. Gentleman, I think before me, spoke about wastewater and the concern around expanding authority to wastewater. Would love to see that. Look forward to working with both PUC and Water Board to make that happen. Thanks.
Thank you. Shannon Catella, Assistant General Manager, South Tahoe Public Utility District, followed by Becky Steinbrunner, Pure Source Water.
Hello, board members, commissioner. Also joining me today is, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Lukens with Lukens Brothers Water Company.
So in South Lake Tahoe, we have our water district is served by about 14,000. We serve about 14,000 water customers. And we have adjacent to us 3 small water systems, one of which is Jen's system. We don't want to take those systems over. We see no value for our ratepayers to have those systems consolidated into our system. And we don't see any value in our community for taking over small local businesses either. However, instead of just ignoring those systems and isolating them off to do their own thing, we are working together in our community. So with all 3 of those systems, we've invested in interconnections, interties with all 3 of those systems, 2 interties in Jen's case. And we work together with all of those systems to find ways that we can cooperatively come to a better situation for our community. For example, one of the small mutual systems, we worked on a grant program with the Forest Service to get fire hydrants installed in their facilities as part of a fire hydrant project that we were doing. And we constructed that. They paid the funds, but it was economies of scale in our larger construction contract to do and provide those services and improve their facilities. So we work with we have a grants coordinator, and we work with the smaller systems to look for opportunities and help them get grants to improve their systems. One of the problems that we see is that since we have 14,000 customers, a population of about 30,000 in our community, we are a disadvantaged community, economically disadvantaged community, and we don't qualify for grants from the Water Board. However, Jen's system does, because they're not only a disadvantaged community, but a small disadvantaged community. And so it makes no sense to my ratepayers to go after funding that I have to pay back to in the form of a loan to the Water Board when Jen can go to the Water Board and qualify for grants for that same project. And so there's real value in us working together. We have, for decades, I think, we have had a groundwater management group in our community, of which the small water providers are an integral part of that. And so when Sigma came along, that just rolled into our stakeholder advisory group. And we've been working on water quality issues in our community together. And we have an area of our system where we have a water supply issue during peak demand periods. And instead of going out and drilling a new well, we're working with Jen on her system to build, to potentially put in a mitigation well, take the water off of that, wheel it into our system, and use that to address our water supply problem. And so we don't see a value in taking over these systems and when they're working. And we've talked a lot about and given a lot of really, we've heard a lot of fairly catastrophic examples of problems with small systems, but there are great small systems out there. Don't lose sight of that and think of small as being failing. Certainly, I think that's been mentioned several times that there's plenty of small systems that are working. We certainly have plenty of examples of a system and a partnership between a larger agency and smaller agencies that is working for the benefit of our community and everyone in it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Becky Steinbruner.
Thank you. My name is Becky Steinbruner. I'm here today as a customer of Pure Source Water Company, a small water company, privately owned. They have 79 connections, and this is in the Santa Cruz Mountains in Santa Cruz County. It is one of the very good small water companies that the former speakers just talked about. It's currently owned by a husband and wife, but contrary to some of the horror stories that you've heard today, they do a stellar job. And the community is very grateful. It hasn't always been that way. I've been a customer of this same water system for 33 years. And when I moved there, it was owned by another husband and wife, John Kavanaugh and his wife, Evelyn, that were at the other end of the spectrum and really better represented the example in Garrapatta. You know, we had boil orders frequently. We ran out of water. And this same couple had developed another system in the county, Vienna Woods, that the county actually had to take over in receivership and for Soquel Creek Water District, the larger server in the area, to take. The customers of Greenbelt Water Company became Pure Source Water Company with the assistance of the county when Mr. and Mrs. Kavanaugh stopped making payments on the Department of Water Resources loan that they'd gotten to upgrade the system. And luckily, we had a good ally in County Council that helped make that transition over to new ownership within our community. The owner lives in the community and had an interest in making sure that it was going to be improved and did an excellent job. Was also able to get some state revolving fund money to put in a new tank, because living in the Santa Cruz Mountains, you do, of course, need a lot of fire storage, and we had none. So I just want to say that it's gone from being very bad to very good, and it's still a small water company. What is a common thread over all of these 33 years, and I was very active in getting the transition from Greenbelt to Pure Source, is that the residents, the customers, do not want to be consolidated with Soquel Creek Water District. That was one option when there was the transition process. I investigated forming a county service area, a water mutual. We talked with Soquel Creek Water District about being taken in, and hands down, people did not want to be part of Soquel Creek Water District. They, said they would need $35,000 a household, and this is back in the mid-90s, to upgrade the system, and people couldn't pay that money. But there's also a very well-founded, deep-seated mistrust of Soquel Creek Water District. The groundwater has been overpumped for years. The Mid-County Groundwater Basin is declared a critical overdraft basin, and I am part of I'm active on the Mid-County Groundwater work. And still, Soquel Creek Water District continues to hand out many, many large development service connections without any, well, there is a water demand offset program, but it's very questionable as to whether that's being upheld and verified for the large developers. They have knowingly pumped TCP into their service connections, knowing that their tests were 3 times the draft limit. And finally, now they have stopped pumping, but only because it was required by the state.
All right. Well, thank you for your comments.
All right, I just want to say, they continue to hire expensive lobbyists and things, so they're not really watching out for the overall efficiency and the ratepayers in how they do. So please, I understand that there are times when there are violations and you really need to step in, but not a blanket mandatory consolidation. It's not always needed, as the former speaker said, and certainly in our area, it would not be welcome.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Raj Arora, followed by Rosanna Herber.
Hello, thanks for having me. So one thing I kind of wanted to bring to everyone's attention, as one kind lady did before me, was that when we talk about water...
I didn't get the organization.
Imagine H2O.
Okay.
Yeah, we're a water technology accelerator looking to deploy innovation to help water problems globally. Long slogan. So kind of what I want to talk about was that in terms of water system consolidation, one really great outcome is that we increase water quality in areas where the quality is subpar. And a huge area where that's the most prevalent, in my opinion, as well as validated by many studies, is the Central Valley. And if you do look at the water there, it's contaminated with both arsenic, nitrate, in some areas uranium. The problems there are intersectional in that you have communities of color that are faced with disadvantages that go far beyond just what's in their water. But kind of the overwhelming majority of the tiny communities that are affected by the most contamination and the worst situations are getting their water from private wells. And while consolidation is a great idea in terms of large utilities to help a small utility, as even the state revolving fund, the principal can be forgiven if that's one of the premises, that's a great idea. But I would really like to encourage you three, as well as everyone else in the room, to think about how do we take a consolidation process and a mechanism for a large organization and system and make it applicable for a very small organization, community, somewhere in the Central Valley, to make it something worth benefiting from. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rosanna Herber, and I'm the president of the Lily Valley Water Company. We're a small mutual water company in Calaveras County, and I'm here to say that we really ask that you give as much flexibility as possible and that you not force consolidation, because you know, we're a very responsible small mutual company. We have 50 hookups, probably 200 people that we serve, and our system is functioning very well. We have a 100,000 gallon water tank. We just upgraded the system. We got a grant from USDA, but we also had to match part of that grant, and all of our shareholders were willing to do that, and we do come from a disadvantaged area. So I just want to add my voice to the other voices and say there are some small water mutual companies that are being very responsible, and the worst thing that could happen to us would be to make us merge with a close public water system that we don't have confidence in. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Ari Newman, Assistant Director, Rural Community Assistance Corporation.
Hi there. For those who are not familiar, RCAC has been providing technical assistance in the 13 Western states for nearly 40 years now to rural communities on water and wastewater issues. And, you know, none of the issues that have been presented today are new or things we haven't seen before. We're glad they're finally getting the attention they deserve, and we really applaud everyone in the room for the focus on this effort. I just wanted to add, you know, a lot of the discussion today is focused on large systems taking over smaller systems, and certainly larger systems have the technical, managerial, and financial capacity that a lot of small systems lack. But there are also a lot of places, not only in California, but throughout our service area, but certainly particularly in California, where there simply aren't large systems nearby. And even if we're not talking about physical consolidation, it's not necessarily feasible for a larger system to intervene. And so we really encourage you to think about ways where we can encourage small system to small system partnerships, or even forming new JPAs or other legal entities. I thought it was a very interesting idea to talk about these sort of countywide special districts that would serve multiple small systems, but really looking at small system to small system, public-public partnerships where they can aid each other. And if you have a workforce issue, you might be able to have an operator from one system serving the needs of the other system that's relatively nearby. So I just encourage you to think about that as an alternative as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, those were all very good comments. And now, Max, did you have
I
anything
think
else
Colin
to say?
Bailey has a blue card in
Oh,
the
okay.
back.
Hi. Okay, thank you.
And at the end here, let's see, we're mixed up today. So members of the board, Commissioner, thanks, Colin Bailey with the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water. My apologies, I had to step out and wasn't able to watch online for some reason. It wasn't feeding quite right. So I'm not sure everything that has been said to date. I was able to hear the PUC's Division of Ratepayer Advocates talk about the affordability nexus, which I think is one that is very worth emphasizing again. I'm recalling Mr. Polhemus's comments. I think what was the phrase there about how nothing stays fixed for 15 years. Well, I can think of one really important counterexample for the purposes of consolidation and affordability, and that is that real wages for low wage earners have in fact stayed fixed for 15 and in fact more years. And many of them in fact have deflated. That's an important feature here to highlight for purposes of what consolidation can mean for affordability. That is, as I'm sure you all are quite aware, where the state water boards and Max and his team's work on AB 401 comes in incredibly importantly. And that is a not wholly separate prong, which much discussion will be happening over the next couple of months. And I applaud Max's team for having undertaken a really robust community engagement process and collecting input on that process. And I don't have a lot of details to provide at this point because there will be a report coming, which will be from both UC Berkeley and EJCW on that subject. It's really just a placeholder for a conversation that needs to be had about really how those two combine importantly, so that as we consolidate, we're not leaving the lowest wage earners behind in a place where water shutoffs can be an unusually cruel debt collection practice, which in our view is contrary to the human right to water policy. So I want to give some careful attention to that. And having run over here, that's about all I've got for the moment. So thank you very much for your time.
So I'm going to let you guys wrap up from the dais. But I just wanted to say to everyone that this has been really useful, a lot of good ideas shared today. I think as staff, we're going to really take this and think about where we go from here. One thing that resonated with me as I was listening to the discussions and the presentations was this concept that we still have so many water districts in the state, and yes, some of the small ones are well run, and we do need to ensure that we're not forcing any small systems that are well run and meeting all the standards to merge unnecessarily. However, we have a lot that aren't, and while we've picked up the pace, as it were, over the past few years, maybe there's more we could do. And the question that really sits with me is, in California, we have a lot of goals. We have goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, for renewable energy. The list goes on. We don't really have a goal for how quickly we should be consolidating water systems so that we're meeting our human right to water goals. We don't have a goal for how many water systems we should have. Now, maybe we shouldn't be putting numerical goals out there, but I think it's a question worth considering and something that I'll be thinking about in relation to everything that was said today. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Max, for all your work, and the CPUC staff as well. I will turn into a pumpkin in just a few minutes, but I have a few thoughts, but would like to hear from the commissioner and my fellow board member here. And then if I just quietly slip out, it's just because I've run out of time.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here and for being honest with all of your perspectives. I know they're not always easy to share, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the diversity of the state and how each of the communities is in a different place. It's very important to keep that in mind. I also think we have perhaps the burden or privilege to think of this as a statewide issue, and don't have, you know, there's a lot that comes with the individual community and the responsibilities to your community, and looking at what's missing in attaining this goal of the human right to water for all Californians. So I really, particularly for folks who kind of have it under control, really welcome your continued engagement on this process, because you have the best knowledge of what's working. I did want to share for those maybe in the public sector who are not as familiar with our rather different process over in San Francisco, is that we have opened a rulemaking on water affordability, and we will be looking at a variety of issues. One is, even though you've heard from one particular company, we do have a very diverse set of systems. And within that diversity, there's a very diverse set of programs for affordability. So we're asking the question, is there need to be more uniformity on affordability, for instance? So there are different questions that we're asking there. And one question relates to this greater overall question of pooling resources. You heard of how we're currently on a very different track on the private side than we are on the public side. We are allowing for pooling of resources with the intention of benefiting the poorest customers. And we have to do that pretty diligently. And the opportunity that we have here with the Water Board is to have that conversation jointly and looking at what are those, what is the best option for pooling, and including the no option at all. And certainly we recognize all the limitations that are within each jurisdiction, Prop 218 being perhaps the biggest within the public sector. So I think we'll be talking together about how to really coordinate our processes as we move forward and take in, really put questions back out to all of you on gaining your thoughts on how we can all move forward as a state. So we look forward to you guys continuing to engage in our mutual processes and giving us your feedback. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Commissioner, for those thoughtful comments, and everyone here who's given presentations and comments on this difficult and complex issue. Again, acknowledging the diversity. You know, the status is very different in the 7,500 odd public water systems or the 3,000 community water systems, et cetera, around the state. So great deal of acknowledgement, a lot of expectations on all of us from the public that we serve, you know, whether if you're a mutual water company, a water district, or the state water board at the PUC, there are high expectations. And it's important for us to recognize first principles. We speak of the human right to water that we've decided as a state is very important. And, you know, even in deeper still, with some of the issues that Martha mentioned, even as our country grapples with issues of equity, we know historically how important equity is to Americans. Okay, this is something that de Tocqueville spoke of. And it's something we grapple with the rate issue. It's visceral, and we acknowledge also importance of water. You know, I speak of, you know, water, you know, by weight, we're much more water than anything else, and I'll tell you, a lot more than melanin. Okay, the water is what all people have in common, and it's incredibly important, and that's why the feelings are so high. because so much is at stake. And people get anxious about water when they're concerned that their livelihoods or their very lives are at stake. And, you know, water rates are important in terms of affecting every one of us. So, you know, we want to just acknowledge that those factors are at play, and a lot of investment of hard-earned wages and processes, and, you know, and folks getting together and working out and solving problems at a local level, like getting a tank at the Mutual Water Company, you know, and it's that old story of the little red hen. You know, everybody wants to eat the bread, but did they go to the trouble of raising the wheat and separating it and baking it and everything else? And the issue of equity, you know. So I think one thing let's all, as Californians, remember, water is what we all have in common, is really important, and that we're not cutting it, folks, if we don't have safe, affordable water for everyone in our state. And we're all responsible because we all share this water. And so we have to kind of take a step back and do things that, you know, look at the, give folks the benefit of the doubt at Cal-Am, for instance, when they say, yeah, we took on Garrapatta. There's a business reason, but there's also a human reason, you know, and that it's part of their DNA at their company to do the right thing, you know, and let's give them the benefit of the doubt and work with them and think of ways together, you know, we can share in this challenge in a fair way, in an equitable way. It's very difficult, but I appreciate folks coming forward with tools, you know, ideas, authorities that the state can bring to bear and really help create solutions that benefit the ratepayers and, you know, the folks who need clean, safe water in the long run. You know, one of the central principles I like to remind folks of is that water is not a good, it's a service. And a lot of our structures were set up around, you know, for reasons that are, you know, and Darren touched on it, the history of water development is complex. And there are reasons why water was treated as a good and why companies were formed around it and that sort of thing. We respect the history. But as we try to grapple with these very real challenges, we need to recognize that the water is a service and that's something that we share. And even with distrust between entities or people or neighbors, we need to learn to set those things aside and recognize the fundamental truth that water is what we all have in common. And that when my neighbor is suffering due to issues related to water, I suffer. My local economy suffers. And so in that spirit, you know, one size can't fit all on consolidation. And you've given us many things to think about in terms of how we can structure things. I think you've learned, you know, you saw the pace of consolidations that we've accomplished under SB 88. It's not lightning fast, you know, and so there's not an imminent, you know, big move at the state level. So it's a great opportunity for us to use this time, I think, you know, humbly, to try to structure things, to create incentives so that, you know, problems can be solved in San Benito County, you know, in San Joaquin County. Recognize problems are being solved in South Tahoe. And just have room and space within our guidance. And you'll find that, you know, our bandwidth at our agency, at the PUC, is not so wide that we're going to be hitting every single issue out there. But we really want to make some significant strides in safe water for communities that don't have it now. I think we got the report, 309 communities without safe drinking water. And that's all of our problem. It's not just the states, it's not just those counties. We're all connected. Our economies and our livelihoods are all connected. It's our obligation as people that share the water to share in this responsibility. So we'll continue to stay engaged and think of ways to work out legislation, policy that can create the right level of incentives to get problem solving done at the local level. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and you took the words out of my mouth on some of your points there, and so I just kind of hung on because I did want to say a few things. First off, that as you said, Board Member Moore, one size does not fit all, and I do get sort of an impression about, you know, the concern that the State Water Board is coming or CPUC is coming, and it reminds me a little bit of what we're going through with sustainable groundwater management. You know, we're looking for tools to be developed at the local level so that local entities can resolve these issues. I really appreciate Commissioner Guzman Aceves' comments at the beginning, and then again reminding us that this is a compelling issue for all of us as a state and together as a state. And one of the quickest ways to do that is to just come together locally and look at what works best for your community. I appreciate South Tahoe Public Utilities District and some of the comments that you made. Whether it be through partnerships, voluntary consolidation, what approaches do you have locally? What tools do you have in the toolbox right now? And what tools do you wish you had that you don't have? And so we may be getting together here and doing sort of reflectiveness amongst all of us to determine next steps, but probably posing some additional questions along those lines, you know, help us to better determine what's the low-hanging fruit that we can easily accomplish with the tools that we have, and then kind of the next level. And what does that next level look like? Do we need some additional authorities, some additional funding, some additional technical assistance, additional partnerships? Please give us your suggestions. Many of you are on the ground looking. I mean, one of the questions that if we had all day to be here, CalAM and then Eastern would have been, what really was the tipping point for you? It's interesting where it just happens in some areas, and then in others it doesn't. You don't quite get there. And I suspect that it's beyond the list of challenges. There's a dynamic in a community that I suspect you have a better sense of just what that tipping point is. And so if we had, you know, all day to be here, I think we could probably really drill down. So just want to thank you all for your comments and your participation, and look forward to working together, both agencies.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Okay.